Good afternoon, everyone. And the first item of business is a debate on motion number S4M06605 in the name of Keith Brown on the Forth Road Bridge Bill. No amendments to the bill have been lodged, so we move straight to the debate on the motion to pass the bill. I'd invite members who wish to speak in this debate to press the request to speak buttons now or as soon as possible. And I now call on Minister Keith Brown to speak to and move the motion. Minister, you have 10 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. And can I also thank the Infrastructure and Capital Investment Committee convener, Maureen Watt, MSP, in the committee for its consideration of the bill, as well as the subordinate legislation and finance committees for their earlier consideration. Obviously, we seek to debate the Forth Road Bridge Bill, which makes provision for the regime for the management and maintenance of the Forth Road Bridge by a body other than FETA. The bill provides for a single contractor managing and maintaining both the Forth Road bridges and delivering value for money and operational efficiencies, with projected savings over the alternatives of around £1.2 million per annum. It also provides for a transfer of FETA's land and assets for use by the Bridge Operating Company and of its liabilities to Scottish ministers. There will be no compulsory redundancies for the 72 staff employed by FETA because they will be transferred under TUPE to the new operating company. FETA's existing bylaws will be revoked and replaced as necessary by road traffic regulation orders. The Infrastructure Committee published its Stage 1 report on the 18th of March, and my considered response to those issues raised was made during Stage 1 at the debates and were contained in my reply of 24th of April to the committee convener. At Stage 2, there was an amendment proposed by Elaine Murray, MSP, on the Forth Bridges Forum, which was, I think, subsequently withdrawn, but we welcome further debate on the bill today. The bridge itself, Presiding Officer, has served the local area and the nation well over the last 49 years and has carried over 500 million vehicles since opening in 1964, and well beyond that which was first envisaged when the bridge was designed and built. The bridge will obviously be 50 years old next year, and I suspect that every member in the Chamber will have used the bridge. It's not something you quickly forget, as at one point it had the longest suspension bridge span outside of the USA. The bill itself will dissolve FETA, whose staff have dedicated large parts of their working lives to the bridge and have built up an extensive knowledge of its workings. By transferring the FETA staff and their experience over to a single operating company who will look after both bridges and the connecting roads, we are not only protecting jobs, but ensuring that a wealth of knowledge is retained. And I'm reminded, Presiding Officer, of a programme I saw on PBS, American TV, recently about the Brooklyn Bridge and the extent to which the construction and maintenance of a bridge is significant, as that can form a very large part of people's lives. And I was privileged to have an event recently where we had the veterans of those who had actually built the Forth Road Bridge come along and to hear their stories and their experience. I also welcome the news that the recent inspection carried out by FETA on the anchorages has provided very positive findings. Anything that offers confidence that the bridge is on a more secure footing will be well received by the people who rely upon it, and the efforts of the FETA workforce should be recognised for this and for their work to prevent further deterioration in the cables due to corrosion. It also confirms, though, the Forth Road Bridge's future as part of a twin bridge strategy that will see the bridge being used as a dedicated public transport crossing. I look forward to using the bridge myself on the Peril for Peace event, which will be undertaken with Provost Jim Leishman of Fife Council this Saturday. The Forth Road Bridge Bill will pave the way for a single operating company to look after the trunk road from Holbeath in the north to Kirtliston in the south. It will include the Forth Road Bridge and the new Forth Crossing motorway. The Bridge Operating Company contract will combine the best practice from FETA's operations and works services manuals and Transport Scotland's new fourth generation of operating company contracts to ensure existing service levels are maintained, if not improved. As I mentioned at Stage 1, the Scottish Government's approach to contracting for network maintenance has delivered continual improvement and significant efficiency savings. These have been estimated at around £18.6 million in 2012-2013, and the Highways Agency in England recently highlighted how Scotland's approach can generate cost savings without compromising service delivery. We have given assurances that the important role FETA has within the community will be captured within the contract or via the Forth Bridges Forum. And as the bills progress through Parliament, we have engaged with those affected and continued to listen to them. We have acted promptly when worries were expressed, for example, over pensions, and we were also quick to put fears to rest by committing to the continuation of FETA's current arrangements. Ministers will act as a guarantor for FETA pensions. And when concerns were raised over the continued availability of the crossing to pedestrians and cyclists during severe weather, we gave a commitment that arrangements put in place by FETA would be written into the operating contract to ensure the public does not encounter a diminution of service post-dissolution of FETA. The construction of its neighbour, the Forth Replacement Crossing, continues to progress on budget and is employing about 1,200 people and benefiting 334 Scottish firms, and it is on time for completion by December 2016. We have also committed funds to the improvement of the cycle link between Fife and Edinburgh, in particular that part between the bridge and Edinburgh itself. The people of Scotland just now are having their say on the name of the new crossing. I know that other countries, in particular Canada, are looking in and paying attention to how we are trying to engage individuals and communities in the biggest infrastructure project in a generation. The response from the public voting for their favourite name has been tremendous. Over 27,500 people have already had their say. And with 15 days left before voting closes on the 7th of June, the public still has the opportunity to influence and be part of an historic process by logging into www.namethebridge.co.uk. Bus lanes built as part of the Forth Replacement Crossing managed motorway project on the M90 and the M9 prioritise public transport between Holbeath and Edinburgh. We have therefore recognised the importance of public transport and the need to make it more attractive to the general public. So the public transport corridor will continue to encourage modal shift from car to public transport and contribute to cross-Forth travel becoming more sustainable. And the Forth Road Bridge Bill is an important step in achieving this. Therefore, when the new crossing opens in 2016, commuters will be able to exploit public transport options at Ferry Toll or the new Holbeath Park and Ride. They can travel along the bus lanes and across the existing Forth Road Bridge to Edinburgh and to the West Lothian areas, taking as much as 30 minutes off peak hour journey times, in comparison to when this considerable investment began. Indeed, with 75% of all southbound bridge traffic passing within a mile of Holbeath, I was pleased to announce last year that the Scottish Government would provide up to £10 million to Fife Council for the Park and Ride facility. I was there at the opening or the start of that construction project. It is well underway now, and I look forward to it being delivered later this year. The Forth Bridges Forum has been formed to facilitate a strategic and collaborative approach to the management and operation of the Forth Bridges. Led by Transport Scotland, it is attended by senior officials from those bodies currently responsible for the bridges, Network Rail for the Forth Bridge, FETA for the Forth Road Bridge and Transport Scotland for the new Forth Crossing, as well as the City of Edinburgh, Fife and West Lothian Councils and Historic Scotland and Visit Scotland. Collectively, they are not only supporting the bridge operators with planned activity, but are taking forward actions to promote the three bridges as a tourist destination. And I hope that the Chamber will agree with me that Scotland has a valuable asset and a unique situation where three iconic structures, feats of cutting-edge engineering in their time, spanning 3 centuries, will themselves become an international tourist destination. A good example of how well the arrangements of the Forum are working is evident with its subgroup, the Forth Bridge World Heritage Nomination Steering Group. That group has invited participation from the local community, who are central to everything that we are trying to do with the Forum, and has just launched a 12-week consultation exercise to help inform the Forth Bridges application for World Heritage status. So, in summary, Presiding Officer, in providing for the Forth Road Bridge to be adopted into the trunk road network, this will allow for the most cost-effective management of the Forth Road Bridges, and it will also support the transport measures which we believe will facilitate the shift from car to more sustainable forms of transport. As I mentioned in a number of the provisions which you have made, and also in the way in which you have listened to those most affected by this, the local communities and the workforce at FETA, it will also protect the existing staff with a commitment of no compulsory redundancies, and through TUPE ensure that the expertise that we have there just now is retained. So for these reasons, Presiding Officer, I hope that members will support the Forth Road Bridge Bill at decision time. And in the meantime, if I can, I would like to move that the Parliament agrees that the Forth Road Bridge Bill be passed. Thank you.
Thank you. Now call on Dr Elaine Murray, 7 minutes or thereby. Please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Now, as the Minister has said, the bill itself is very short. It abolishes the Forth Estuary Transport Authority and it transfers its assets to the Scottish Ministers, and it also transfers the staff working for FETA to the bridge, and it trunks the existing fourth crossings and the roads around it. It is a short bill, and there is little to amend. I did, however, bring an amendment to stage 2 to allow discussion of an issue to which I will refer later. I have not brought it back at stage 3, as firstly, it wouldn't get through, and there seemed to be little point in dragging every member of this Parliament back into the chamber for one unsuccessful amendment. But secondly, I don't think it actually requires an amendment to the face of this very short bill to achieve the changes which I was wishing to discuss, because the issues involved are not actually contained in the legislation. Committee members are aware of the concerns expressed by Edinburgh City Council regarding the abolition of the 4th Estuary Transport Authority and the consequent lack of input from the local elected members and the lack of availability of information on how management decisions will be made. The 4th Estuary Transport Authority included councillors from 4 local authorities: Edinburgh, Fife, West Lothian and Perth and Kinross. And the minutes of the FETA meetings were recorded and published, as certainly they were published on the Edinburgh City Council's website. Now, during the stage 1 consideration of this bill, none of the councils other than Edinburgh had expressed any concerns. So prior to this debate, I contacted councillors from the other councils represented on FETA, and it turned out that all of them did agree with Edinburgh's concerns. Indeed, some went further and said that they felt that the abolition of FETA exhibited a centralising tendency on the part of the Scottish Government, and I think by implication on the part of the Scottish Parliament. They were concerned that the operation of the bridge was being privatised, and indeed one councillor told me he was very disappointed with the Infrastructure and Capital Investment Committee members for not opposing the abolition of FETA, because he would have liked FETA to manage the new crossing in addition to the existing one. Now, can I say that if that had been possible, it would have attracted my support. However, Graham Porteous advised the committee on the 16th of January that FETA would not be permitted to manage both bridges, as it was fully funded by government, and that if it used government funds to bid for the contract, this would constitute a state aid and would be in contravention of EU legislation. And no evidence was brought to committee which contradicted this advice, either at stage 1 or subsequently. And committee members have to make judgments based on evidence rather than because other people say they don't like the decisions they've made. So that is one of the reasons why I have not actually pursued that particular option, because we were not presented with evidence which contradicted the advice that the committee was given. Surely.
I wonder if it's, can I thank the member for taking the intervention? I wonder if it's possible, either just now or subsequently, to let us know exactly which councillors it was that have made these comments, because we didn't receive any suggestions along those lines from the councils, and it has to be the councils that we consult with rather than individual councillors. We didn't receive any of those comments from any of the councils.
Dr. Murray?
I can accept that possibly the Scottish Government didn't, and in fact I didn't until I asked them if they agreed with the comments that Edinburgh had actually openly said. So, but I did get that feedback from all of the councils who are represented on FETA. There was actually a general agreement that it made sense for both bridges to be managed by the same organisation, and it was also stated that new legislation would have been required even if it had been possible for FETA to bid to operate both bridges. And there were also issues around the demonstration of value for money should FETA enter the tendering process, as it was deemed to be difficult to produce an accurate figure for FETA operating both bridges. Indeed, by call from FETA on 6 February, he did express disappointment that the company was to be discontinued, but he stated that the focus needed to be on the best outcome for road users. So if I could move on to the amendment which I moved at stage 2 and didn't bring back. I have to say I think there's been some confusion of what was actually being requested in terms of the continued involvement of local councillors after the abolition of FETA. The Minister argued that it would be wrong for local authority elected representatives to be, quote, involved in looking after an operating contract that is wholly the responsibility of the Scottish ministers, and that it would be not dissimilar for asking Scottish ministers to be involved in a local roads management project. And he also believed that this would muddy the waters with regard to their lines of accountability about who is responsible for taking the decisions on the operating contract and who is responsible for expenditure. But I think the Minister did recognise the need for local representation, and he advised that he had established a forum to deal with both the issues which might arise during the building of the bridge and after it is completed. And local community representatives were going to be welcome in that forum, as I understand were council officials. But for reasons which I don't really understand, councillors would not. Now, the forum monitors the building and operation of the bridge. It doesn't operate the bridge. And therefore, I don't think that the objections regarding the lines of accountability actually apply. I know the Minister argued that democratic accountability would be ensured because Transport Scotland and the Government would stand behind the contract, and that they would not. He felt that we should not complicate that further by putting in elected representation who would not be responsible for the spending decisions. But the thing is that the forum is not making spending decisions. Those would be made by the operating company. They would be monitoring the operation of the bridge and scrutinising the spending decisions. Graham Porteous explained to us that if the community groups were unhappy with what the contractor is doing, they have the avenue of the forum to make representations on their behalf. So really what I was asking for is the local councillors being able to be part of that forum and being able to make representations on behalf of their constituents, or indeed more generally on behalf of the local authorities, which will after all be affected by the operation of the bridge. And also, in the interest of accountability, I feel that the minutes of these meetings should be published and made available to interested members of the public who may not actually be members of the forum. And that was the gist of the amendment I brought at stage 2. I mean, the Minister didn't think it was appropriate to establish another quango in legislation. I think actually I accept that argument is true, and that it was rather lopsided also in terms of it only referred to a local elected member representation and didn't fully encompass the other responsibilities of the operating company, which will operate the old bridge as well as the new. And we hadn't taken evidence, let's be honest, on the making of the forum a statutory body at stage 1, so in a sense the amendment was not maybe appropriate. So I haven't brought another amendment to stage 3, because I don't actually think these are items for the face of the bill, but they are issues of concern to councillors representing the authorities with a principal interest in the fourth crossing, and I hope that they may be able to be discussed further. Thank you.
Many thanks. I now call on Alex Johnson. Mr Johnson, 5 minutes or thereby.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. As the Minister and members in this chamber will be aware, there's nothing I like better than a good fight. But in order to justify that position, it has, of course, to be my position also, where I agree with the Government to do so. I therefore rise to support the motion in the name of the Minister today. And I'm surprised how that impressed those on the back benches. The decision to go ahead with this change in the management of the Forth Bridge is to accommodate the new bridge and the new structures is one which I support. And it's surprising, perhaps, that we've come to this stage in the debate with no amendments and almost unanimity within the chamber. But the reason for that is that this has been a long road to get to where we are. And the decision to go for this particular management structure, bringing an end to FETA and simply managing the bridge and its approach roads as a contract would do for any other part of the trunk road network, is, I believe, the best option. It has to be said there has been one or two moments of controversy, and it would be inappropriate for me not to mention them at this stage. There was, of course, the question of the quality of the consultation which took place, something which I believe the Government did get right on this occasion, but not the first time in recent months that we've had question marks over consultation. Perhaps the Government has to look at that to ensure that all parties feel they have been adequately consulted in future legislation. There was also concern over the transfer of liabilities, where right up to the end of the Stage 1 inquiry conducted by the committee, there appeared to be significant concerns, particularly by Edinburgh City Council, that it was not being absolved of liabilities. I think the Minister's letter, which was timely and decisive, cleared that argument up once and for all. It would be appropriate for me in this short opening statement to take the opportunity to pay tribute to FETA and the work it has done. FETA and its staff have demonstrated their ability to manage the existing Forth crossing, and I think the fact that many of their staff will transfer to the successor organisation and will continue doing that good job is something that we can all welcome. However, it was under the heading of FETA that the most decisive and perhaps inappropriate decision was made in recent years, which caused me to feel that councillor representation in the process was one that was negative rather than positive. The decisions made in this Parliament to permit city entry charges and the requirement for a local referendum to implement them meant that Edinburgh went through the process of having local councillors campaign for city entry charges, then in their local referendum campaign against the imposition of city entry charges, and then, as a result of that, a suggestion being made by councillors on FETA that the Forth Road Bridge tolls should be made variable, with an option of up to £4 being charged for cars at certain times, as a proxy for the city entry charges which they could not have. The idea that local councillors in Edinburgh might propose changes to the Forth Road Bridge toll in order to get round the problem that they created for themselves was, in my view, an abuse of power. The fact that it was seen through and, as the result of actions in this Parliament, it never actually happened, is a good thing, but nevertheless the fact that it was proposed is something which called into question the actions of the councillors that were behind it. It therefore remains my view that it is an advantage in this process that ministerial responsibility will be put in place on this for future management, and as a consequence, if we have a problem with the way the bridge is being managed, we in this chamber can take it to the Minister, and that we have a more direct and responsible line of accountability than we otherwise would have had. Before I conclude, I wanted to say a few words in response to what the Minister said and supporting what the Minister said about the new bridge. The three bridges together across the Forth will be iconic. If the rail bridge achieves its objective in becoming a achieving World Heritage status, then the whole area of the bridges will become significant in tourist terms. I think the opportunities that that presents are worthy of support, they are worthy of our enthusiastic promotion, and I believe that there will be a tremendous advantage for Scotland as well as this area in Edinburgh. Finally, on the name, my preferred option is St Margaret's Crossing. I will be encouraging everybody to adopt that name wherever possible. I want that name to be on that bridge forevermore. And then the only thing we have to achieve after that is the canonisation of Margaret Thatcher, and my work will be done.
Many thanks. We now move to the open debate, and I call on David Torrance to be followed by Margaret McCulloch. 4 minutes?
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And just to let Alec Johnston know, I voted for St Margaret's Crossing on it. The Forth Road Bridge Bill before us today proposes to put the management of both the Forth Road Bridge and a new replacement crossing under a single bridge operating company. It will also remove legislative barriers, allowing the Scottish Government to include the Forth Road Bridge in a new contract for maintenance. The benefits of this include financial and operational efficiencies and a strategic and collaborative approach to management and maintenance of both bridges, and the connecting roads from N90, Junction 3 in the north, through to M9, 1A Junction in the south. Further, the bill makes provision for the dissolution of the Forth Estuary Transport Authority, but allows for the transfer of all 72 current employees of the Forth Estuary Transport Authority to a new company under 2P regulations. This will not only protect their terms and conditions, but more importantly ensure that such a valuable wealth of experience will be retained and can be utilised. A unified management approach is key to a continued and effective operation of one of the East Coast's most vital transport structures, linking north and south. The replacement crossing will provide more efficient and speedier links for both businesses and commuters, and is vital to helping promote the growth in industry and tourism in Scotland. Locally, the new crossing will provide a welcome boost to the economy by removing uncertainties and helping to increase confidence that in the future there will be excellent transport links for the whole of Fife, the East Coast and beyond. These links will allow businesses to grow and expand, providing jobs and strengthening the local economy. Commuters will also have reason to celebrate. The new crossing. Transport Scotland has confirmed that pedestrians, cyclists and bus users will experience no change as a result of the bill. The new operator intends to carry out the same functions as the current one. Once the replacement crossing opens, the Forth Road Bridge will be used exclusively by buses, taxis, cyclists and pedestrians. This will be of real benefit to commuters on both sides of the Forth. The provision of a dedicated crossing will not only reduce travel times, but should make journeys much easier and more pleasant. Hopefully it will also prove to be a boom to tourism in Fife by encouraging more tourists to venture into the region and experience all the cultural and historic aspects that are on offer. Commuters have already experienced some of the benefits following the implementation of a motorway management technology on the M90 in Fife in December 2012. This was the first time an intelligent transport system has been introduced in Scotland. The system itself creates a dedicated bus lane and uses mandatory speed limits during congestion periods in order to minimise traffic jams and provide greater flexibility in journey times for regular commuters. This is another early benefit of the crossing, especially as it is helping to relieve a great deal of pressure on the highly utilised and essential section of the transport network. The bill will also deliver value for money. The Twin Bridge contract allows for staff to work on both bridges and connecting roads. Operations will be managed from existing premises, which will also be overseeing the use of vehicles, plant and equipment. This not only ensures the best use of available resources, but will result in a saving to the public purse. In conclusion, Presiding Officer, the lack of amendments at the final stage of the bill would indicate that there appears to be support across the Chamber today, and I am happy to support the Government's Forth Road Bridge Bill. It will ensure the continued effective management of a Forth Road Bridge replacement crossing, whilst simultaneously enhancing current essential transport links. The benefit of having an excellent system in place to facilitate easy access not only to Fife, but to the whole of the East Coast is incalculable and will provide reassurance in the future for both the business sector and commuters.
Thank you very much. And we have a little time in hand, so interventions would be welcomed. Now call on Margaret McAuliffe to be followed by Jim Eadie.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. This week, the Infrastructure and Capital Investment Committee visited the Forth to hear first-hand about the progress that has been made with this new crossing and to learn more about the legacy of the existing one. I regret that I couldn't join my committee for that visit, but I understand it was a very informative trip and it comes on top of a lot of helpful advice and updates we have received over a period of time. This is a once-in-a-lifetime project, and as such it demands a full parliamentary scrutiny and a level of accountability that can sometimes be lost when governments commit to such big undertakings. This bill is essential about how we take forward the management of the Forth Road Bridge and its connecting roads, which will continue to be an important part of our national infrastructure and will continue to affect the local communities. It will, as we have been hearing, abolish the Forth Estuary Transport Authority, transfer the assets and liabilities to Scottish ministers and redesignate the existing Forth Road Bridge as a trunk road. It will also, as we have been hearing, allow for the transfer of staff under two-pay regulations, which is necessary in these circumstances. I want to draw the Chamber's attention to some of the comments made by UCAT and Unite, both trade union representing the workers concerned, who gave their views on this whole process to the committee. In dissolving FETA, the Scottish ministers will tender for a new operating company whose workers will immediately transfer over to. However, trade unions want to make sure that there is no erosion of their members' rights in the process and that any changes are consistent with both the letter and the spirit of the two-pay regulations. We expect that the maintenance contract will also go out to tender, and Unite are seeking firm assurances that there will be no compulsory redundancies as a result, given the Scottish Government's previous statement on the matter. Equally, UCAT are clear that they want their members to continue to benefit from the membership of the Lothian Pension Fund, and the Scottish Government have indicated that this will be guaranteed and that FETA workers will be granted admitted body status even when they are transferred over to the new contractor. I wonder if the Scottish Government could confirm that this is indeed the case and that steps are being taken to secure jobs and pensions on the Forth Estuary. I would also ask the Scottish Government, in light of the arguments made by my Labour colleague Elaine Murray, as well as Edinburgh City Council, to ensure that there is no dilution of scrutiny or accountability. The new forum established in place of FETA will be officer-led and not councillor-led. I can therefore understand why local communities could feel that they are not being properly represented at a time of great change for the Ford estuary. I am sure I don't need to remind the Minister that local people and local businesses will have to live with the consequences of the decisions we make here today for many years to come. In the time I have left, I want to stress the need for a joined-up approach to public procurement, consistent with the wider procurement reform agenda. The current Forth Road Bridge is iconic, and it will remain so for the rest of its lifetime. Just as it is important to create opportunities for workers on the new replacement crossing, it is important that we make the most of our existing infrastructure too. When the new contract is awarded, I would ask the Scottish Government to make sure that they do all they can to promote youth employment, local jobs and apprenticeships. And I would also ask them to do all they can to eliminate blacklisting and to ensure that no firms which continues with such unfair practices receive public money. Presiding Officer, this bill has been brought forward for understandable reasons, but I feel there is a good case for further guarantees to give local workers and local communities more confidence in the process at a time of significant change for all those who live and work in the Forth. Thank you.
Very much. I now call on Jim Eadie to be followed by Richard Lyle. A generous 4 minutes.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I too am grateful for the opportunity to speak in this Stage 3 debate on the Forth Road Bridge Bill. By 2014, the Forth Road Bridge will have been an essential part of the national road infrastructure for 50 years, and it is vital to the economy of Fife, an essential link for the East Coast Corridor and essential to the connectivity of Fife and beyond. The Forth Road Bridge now carries 25 million vehicles every year, almost 6 times the traffic volumes it originally carried, and there are operational challenges, including its susceptibility to restrictions and closures during strong winds. The purpose of the bill makes provision for the future management and maintenance of the Forth Road Bridge as part of the wider strategy to upgrade the Forth crossing transport network, and it allows, as we have heard already this afternoon, for the dissolution of the Forth Estuary Transport Authority, which currently manages and maintains the Forth Road Bridge, and it allows for the designation of the Forth Road Bridge as a trunk road, bringing it under the direct responsibility of Scottish ministers. It allows for the transfer of all FETA assets and liabilities to Scottish ministers, and for the transfer of FETA staff into the employment of a bridge operator to be appointed by Scottish ministers, following a procurement process. Now, a number of issues were highlighted by the Infrastructure and Capital Investment Committee. The committee agreed that a single bridge operating company is the most appropriate and cost-effective approach to the management and maintenance of both the existing and new crossings. And the Forth replacement crossing is a major infrastructure project necessary to safeguard a vital connection in the country's transport network. The Minister and previous speakers have made reference to the transfer of employment rights of existing FETA employees, and this is an important issue. And here the bill offers continuing employment and certainty of tenure for all existing FETA staff. It avoids, as my colleague on the Infrastructure and Capital Investment Committee, Margaret McCulloch, said in her contribution, any compulsory redundancies, and it ensures that the terms and conditions of employees are protected. The Infrastructure and Capital Investment Committee stated in its report published in March, and I quote, "The committee is reassured that significant efforts have been made to maintain the terms and conditions of FETA staff transferring to the new bridge operator." Now, another issue which we have heard mentioned this afternoon, of course, is that of local accountability arrangements, and that formed the basis of much of Dr Murray's contribution. But here I think we need to remind ourselves of what the view of the committee was, having heard the evidence from local authorities and other stakeholders, and when reflecting that evidence in the report which it published. The committee's view was that the inclusion of local authority officials on the Forth Bridges Forum is an appropriate level of input, and notes that no changes to the forum membership has been recommended by the committee. I think that that is the correct approach. The committee also commended Transport Scotland for its work in terms of the arrangements for staff being transferred across, in particular in relation to pension arrangements. And it's right that Transport Scotland should continue to offer staff every available support and to work with their trade unions and other bodies who represent staff interests during the transition period. One of the positive aspects of the bill, as my colleague David Torrance highlighted in his contribution, is the fact that there will be no change for users of the bridge, and here I am thinking particularly of cyclists, pedestrians and those who use public transport. There is a role for the bridge as an active travel corridor, and I welcome the Minister's commitment reiterated this afternoon that the public will not experience a diminution in the level of service provided. There is an opportunity for the bridge, therefore, to support sustainable and active travel. And following the opening of the new crossing, the Forth Road Bridge would be used exclusively by buses, taxis, cyclists and pedestrians. And I think we all would welcome that. In conclusion, Presiding Officer, I welcome the Stage 3 debate this afternoon. This is a short bill whose provisions are tightly defined and technical, but it is an important one for Scotland's transport infrastructure network. I commend the Minister, members of the Infrastructure and Capital Investment Committee and members across the Chamber for their constructive contributions this afternoon and for the constructive approach that they have taken during the passage of this legislation. I look forward, therefore, to supporting the bill at Stage 3 this evening. And in terms of the name of the new crossing, tempted though I am by St Margaret's Crossing, not least of all in deference to Margaret McCulloch, a member of the Capital and Infrastructure Investment Committee, and thinking of my own political mentor, Margaret Ewing, I do think that we possibly could all agree that it should be the Saltire Crossing.
Thanks. And I now call on Richard Lyle to be followed by Helen Eadie, a generous 4 minutes.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I also am very happy to take part in this debate. And I'll give you a small history lesson if I can. In the 1960s, I do have fond memories of using the ferry crossing between the North and South, Queen's Ferry. I also remember walking across the then newly constructed Forth Road Bridge. When the bridge opened back in September 1964, the excitement of seeing the new bridge was quite something. It is indeed, I would suggest, something of an icon, and at that time complemented the rail bridge. Another example of something of the many things that is a must to see for visitors to Scotland. Who could have thought then that the bridge, which has now stood for 49 years, could expect to have 25 million plus cars passing over it on an average per annum? Amounting to over 61,000 per day, this level and intensity of use is one of the major contributors to the current condition that the Forth Road Bridge is in. That, I believe, is why expert opinion has agreed that the renewal of the bridge is in the best interest of Scotland's people, but of great benefit to local communities in the immediate area. The new bridge that this bill outlines is pioneering in the sense that it is, for the first time, will truly capture the imagination of the public across all walks of life. The inclusion of Scotland's people means that they are included in a decision-making process about a key piece of long-lasting infrastructure, but I believe that it will also encourage general participation in the politics of people's day-to-day lives. I look forward to a public vote regarding the name of the bridge, and I have to confess I have not voted yet. Caledonian Bridge, Firth of Forth Crossing, Queen's Ferry Crossing, Saltire Crossing, St Margaret's Crossing. I have to compliment the Minister on the way that he has conducted this public participation, and very pleased to see that even the Canadians want to get involved in what has happened. My hope for this new bridge, and I know that under an SNP government it shall remain that way, is that this new bridge will remain toll-free, just as the previous one is as a result of the abolition of such measures under this present government, a fact which Alec Johnson touched on slightly. I thought he'd go the full hog, but not yet, to compliment the SNP government. Looking specifically at the bill and its intentions, it seems clear that the Scottish Government have looked deeply into a number of options available for the management of the Forth Road Bridge. I support the intention to let a new single contract manage and maintain the new staffing, and also to safeguard the staff. When reading into the bill further, I thought it best to look at what financial implications would come as a result of passing this bill. And I note that the financial memorandum highlights that it is likely to cost around £1.2 million per annum less to let a contract for the management and maintenance of both the Forth Road Bridge and Forth Replacement Crossing, rather than having the bridges managed by two separate organisations. More generally, with replacement comes a whole host of benefits, both economic and also uses to those who use the bridge themselves. The replacement crossing will be a benefit to the user, as it already has been stated, reduced travel times, travel distance. The new crossing will bring it with it significant economic impacts to both communities of Lothian and Fife, and with extension Scotland as a whole. To conclude, Presiding Officer, it is clear that as no amendments have been put forward to the bill, that this is a proposal which this whole chamber supports. And I am delighted to have had my chance today to take part in this debate, to put forward my contribution to what I believe is a hugely significant piece of infrastructure here in Scotland that I believe will be fitting for generations to come.
Many thanks. And I now call on Helen Eadie to be followed by Animal Ewing. A generous 4 minutes.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. And I'll just make a comment that we had Alex Ferguson saying this is a long road to the bridge, and then we had John Penton at the back of me saying this is a bridge too far. Well, John, it was never in my books a bridge too far, because in terms of the new Forth crossing, if I have to give credit where credit's due, then I'm very glad that the government is building a new crossing. So I'm delighted at that, having been one of the people who was pilloried in the beginning for daring to suggest many years ago that we should have a new crossing. I was delighted when it was agreed that we would have one. And when it comes to the debate of naming a new bridge, I'm just very surprised. By the way, it would be an anathema to me, I'm sorry, Margaret, to call it St Margaret's Crossing. Anything to do with Margaret Thatcher? No, I am sorry, absolutely no. Now, I'm just surprised that maybe we've not heard this mentioned by colleagues, but at a time when you're saying we're going to have independence next year, you've not talked about the Liberty Bridge. Throw that out there to you. But, however, coming back to the more serious issues, and I'm out of step. I'm in trouble these days all the time for being out of step, but I did not agree in stage one, and I don't agree again, that this is the right way forward, because to me this is a bit like the debate that we had in other departments of government. It's about a sense of creeping privatisation, because that's what I believe this is all about, because we've had FETA. Now, FETA was established with a very specific, a broad remit, even better than the Forth Road Bridge Joint Bridge Board, which I used to be a member of as the Vice-Chair of that. And when that was established, that had a fairly broad remit. But when FETA came along, its prime purposes were to look at a variety of initiatives like improving the cross-Forth travel and reducing congestion. Anybody who comes from that part of Scotland, as I do, will know the terrible problems there have been in crossing that particular part of the Forth. And so, to me, this will do nothing to enhance that. I know that the Forth crossing should make a huge difference, and I am delighted about that, but I still think there will be issues. And for the other thing that FETA did do was about actually improving the public transport as well, initiatives that were developed. We had Park and Ride that was developed. That was developed when I was the transportation spokesperson in Fife Council on the north side of the river. And now we have Holbeath. Now, Holbeath was planned all these years ago as a park and ride facility. All these things came under the umbrella of FETA as a planning process, and that was what was great about it. It looked at a very specific part of congested area in Scotland, and it had a precise role to serve. Now, I hope that the government, and I hope that when the Minister is carrying on with this task, that he will address those issues, because I don't think that, really, frankly, Transport Scotland will be able to give it the same intensity of support that FETA has been able to give. Yes, by all means, Minister.
Keith Brown.
Thank the member for giving way, and also just mention, as I did in the opening statement, that in relation to the last point that Helen Eadie made about the park and ride at Holbeath, Transport Scotland and the Government have followed that through by providing £10 million to actually get this done. It was talked about for a long time, but it will now be done as a result of the Government money going into this project.
Yes, but it was FETA and the local authorities that really developed that idea in the beginning. And the fact is that, starvation of cash to an organisation doesn't say that when you come along to provide the cash, it doesn't diminish the important role that FETA actually played in developing that. And that was the point that I was making. It came up with solutions for specific problems, and there were very specific congestion problems all around that area of Scotland. And I think there will still be problems to come in the years ahead, but you will not have the machinery there to develop it. You will have governments who could pull levers, but if the levers aren't attached to the machinery, it won't happen. And that's the point that I'd make on that. I think when it comes to the other many issues that were identified by the committee, I think it's very good that the Minister responded positively to so many of them. But I do come back to the very important point that I believe that has been made by my colleagues, both Margaret and Elaine, about the issues of the involvement of the local council representation. Because if you go back to the history as to how that bridge came about, it was the 4 key local authorities that actually decided that that bridge would come into being. And all throughout that history, since 1947, since that bridge has been in being, they have addressed, through the council representation, the very specific issues of the people in North Queensferry, of South Queensferry, West Lothian, East Lothian and Fife, all the issues, and Lothian Council itself. There are many issues, and I can remember many of them as a Bridge Board Vice-Chair coming up at those meetings, and I really feel it's a very, for a government that wants to engage with the people and wants to engage, why do you always discriminate against the local authorities just because politically they might not be your particular colour at that particular time? I think that's a regressive state to actually be going forward on. Well, when it comes to the... I'm glad of your contribution, but perhaps you might wish to draw to a close. Okay, Presiding Officer, I'm grateful for your tolerance. I'll leave it at that, and thank you for that very much. Thank you.
Okay, many thanks. I now call on Annabel Ewing, after which we move to closing speeches.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I too am very pleased to have been called to speak in the Stage 3 debate on the 4th Road Bridge Bill. And whilst I am not a member of the Infrastructure and Capital Investment Committee, I most certainly have an interest in the crossings across the Forth as a member of this Parliament for Mid-Scotland and Fife. And indeed, Presiding Officer, the other evening as I was returning to Edinburgh across the Forth Road Bridge, I was struck once again by what a magnificent feat of engineering it is. And that holds particularly true, of course, for the iconic Forth Railway Bridge. And it is therefore to be very much welcomed indeed that it is being nominated for a UNESCO World Heritage Site Award. And I would also add in this respect that it is very much to be welcomed that the Scottish Government has just launched a 12-week consultation seeking views about, for example, the benefits that a successful bid could deliver for the local communities. And I would say to Mr Johnson, gently, not simply in Edinburgh, but of course in the Kingdom of Fife, and also looking at the benefits that could be brought with the new crossing as regards tourism, education, skills and innovation. And at the same time, I would wish to make my own comment about the naming process for the new crossing. I think it has been an excellent example of engagement with the public. Of course, the short list of 5 names was agreed to by a very distinguished panel, so it wasn't really for individual backbenchers or indeed the Scottish Government to come up with any particular names, as Ms Eadie seemed to suggest. But anyway, they've come up with an excellent choice of 5 possible names, Presiding Officer, and I found it very difficult indeed to make my choice. Have just done so online, and I have, for good historical reasons, chosen, like my Fife MSP David Torrens, St Margaret's Crossing, and for historical reasons and nothing to do with recent political historical events, I would hasten to stress to Mr Johnson, who's smiling hopefully at me. So I was very impressed with the process, and I would encourage as many people to get online, to phone, to text, whatever the process they prefer to engage in is, to make their vote count, because it is very much a people's contest, naming contest, and that's the way it should be. And I think these examples of public engagement, Presiding Officer, augur very well indeed for the contribution that the Forth Bridges Forum will be making going forwards. And of course it will have the central role of ensuring that the interests of local people are indeed at the core of the management and maintenance of the Forth Bridges. And we have heard much this afternoon about the detail of the Forth Road Bridge Bill, and of course the principal objective is to facilitate the most cost-effective and coordinated approach to the management and to the maintenance of the new Forth crossing and the Forth Road Bridge. And it seems very clear to me, Presiding Officer, that contracting to a single bridge operating company to carry out management and maintenance for both of these bridges makes the most sense and provides certainly the best value to the taxpayer, who is under very much pressure indeed at the moment. And at the same time, as has been highlighted by many members in this afternoon's debate, in particular my colleague Jim Eadie spent some considerable time in his speech on this very key issue concerning staff terms and conditions. I am very, very happy indeed that this issue has been fully and properly addressed by the Minister, such that these rights and terms and conditions are to be protected under TUPE, and that this assurance is indeed in the face of the bill. And I'm sure that will provide enormous comfort to the excellent staff of FETA. And I am pleased also to note that there are opportunities for additional positions with the new operating company. So I very much welcome that key assurance that we see now in the face of the bill, and I also welcome the Minister's assurance that, of course, the Scottish Government Ministers will act as guarantor with respect to important pension rights. So, given that these key issues have been addressed, Presiding Officer, I am very pleased indeed, in conclusion, to support the passage of the bill this afternoon. Thank you.
Many thanks. We now move to the winding up of speeches, and I call on Alex Johnson. 4 minutes or thereby, please.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. I'm tempted to say there's not much more to say on this subject, and however, I'm aware of the schedule and will do my best to try and fill my part of the timescale. One of the issues that came up during the course of the debate, in fact, I was somewhat disappointed to be accused of not having given the government credit for abolishing the tolls on the Forth Road Bridge. Now, I'd like to point out that the government that took that choice was very much a minority government, and it was the decision of this whole Parliament to abolish the tolls on the Forth Bridge. And any attempts to claim the glory of that decisive move by the backbenchers on the government side is an inappropriate use of Parliament, in my view. Yes, we did abolish the tolls on the Forth Bridge, and it was part of a sea change in attitudes towards the provision of this kind of facility. If we think back to the construction of the Forth Road Bridge was essentially put together not only to build and manage the bridge, but also to manage the debt associated with that bridge and the cost of maintaining it. It was therefore reasonable to think that when the bridge was paid for, perhaps we should no longer be charging tolls. However, the cost of maintaining the bridge did justify that. The change from the Bridge Board to FETA had the effect of allowing them to build up some extra money, and it was, I suppose, sensible for government to then use that extra resource to improve the access roads to the bridge, which again is what they did. Yes?
Can I thank the member for giving way and just say to remind the member, I think he was hinting at this, that it was actually the deal at the time that the bridge was constructed that the tolls would go when the capital costs of the bridge were paid, and they were paid off in 1994. That's when the tolls should have been taken off.
Indeed, that was a revelation that was produced at the time we were discussing the removal of the tolls. However, the reason why I went through that piece of or record of history is that the idea that we now do not have tolls on the bridge and it should be dealt with in much the same way as any other part of the trunk road network is something which has gained credence and support in this Parliament. It is therefore, in my view, entirely appropriate that we end the practice of having a separate board or organisation for dealing with the bridges, and should now be in the position where, when the government pays for the maintenance of this facility or this bridge, then he who pays the piper should call the tune. And therefore, I think it is important that ministerial responsibility and accountability is in place over how the bridge is managed, since the government will be responsible for deciding how it is funded. And I don't believe that ministerial accountability is a weak route for accountability. I think being able to hold government ministers to account in this Parliament is a key part of ensuring public accountability. In fact, the tendency in recent years to form arm's-length organisations which are under ministerial control to some extent, but can take the blame when it goes wrong, has effectively weakened ministerial accountability in many areas. And I think what we have now is a clear and decisive line of accountability, which will allow us to ensure that this facility, once provided, is properly managed and properly funded, and should it not be, then we will be able to call the Minister to account in this Parliament. Cost-effective management is important, and it is of course the case that the decision that has been made could result in savings of £1.2 million a year in the management of the bridge. That's an essential piece of management efficiency. We must make sure that public assets are managed efficiently, and I don't see it as a difficulty that private companies will be in a position to bid for this contract and take on this responsibility. After all, is it not private companies who are building the new fourth crossing in the first place? I am confident that the arrangements the Government have put in place through this bill will work. I am confident that they will manage the new bridge and the old bridge efficiently, and I am confident that we will be able to hold the Government to account should there be any failings in the way they manage and finance this prospect. So therefore, I am delighted to offer once again my sincerest support for this bill when we vote at stage 3 tonight.
Thank you very much. I call on Dr Lane Murray. 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. As Alex Johnson referred to, this debate probably is considerably longer than the bill, and I also am not terribly sure that there is a great deal more to be said than has already been said during this debate. But a number of issues have been brought out by members. Richard Lyle took me back talking about when you could actually cross the Forth on the ferry, because when I was a very young girl, my grandparents lived in Fife, and we were brought up in Edinburgh, and it was one of the attractions of going, well, there's obviously attraction to see my grandparents who spoiled us anyway, but actually going and sitting on the ferry and having your sandwiches made it feel almost like voyaging to a foreign country going over to Fife. I think back well thought we were foreigners as well coming in, but that's a very pleasant memory, and I too remember seeing the Forth Road Bridge being built, which was an exciting time, but who would have thought that in only 40-odd years later we would have to look at another crossing and that there would be problems with the bridge. And I think that's a bit of a surprise to those of us long enough in the tooth to have spanned the entire life of that bridge. There was a number of people made comments about the name of the bridge. And I too had thought St Margaret's Crossing was quite a good name for the bridge for historic reasons, until I heard Alex Johnson, who totally put me off calling it St Margaret's Crossing. And I think rather shocked others like David Torrance had already voted for St Margaret's Crossing. Surely.
She will be aware that I did explain my scheme, and the second part about getting Margaret Thatcher made a saint is probably going to be slightly more difficult.
Yes, indeed, there might be a certain amount of resistance to that. A number of members talked about the issues to do with staff and welcomed the fact, Margaret McCulloch and Jim Eadie both welcomed the fact that the wages and conditions of those staff are preserved. And indeed, on these Labour benches, we do welcome Scottish ministers acting as guarantor for Feta's employees' pensions and the protection of jobs and conditions under TUPE. And I'm sure it will be a relief to the 60 existing pensioners and other previous employees that they will remain part of the Lothian scheme. Alex Johnson also mentioned the issue of consultation, and initially there were concerns over the lack of consultation with the relevant trade unions. However, I believe that the trade unions, UCAT and Unite, again Margaret McCulloch referred to this, are happy now with the conditions and the assurances that they have received. Much of the essential detail is not on the bill, but that is a matter of fact. It's not a criticism of the bill, and as a number of members made clear, the conditions in the operating contract are crucial. These must work in the public interest, and therefore the procurement process, as Margaret McCulloch said, will be very important. This must ensure both quality and sustainability, and not be about just getting the cheapest price for the operation of the bridge. So I too look forward to learning more about the proposed minimum standards on procurement and how community benefit will be ensured. Apprenticeships and job opportunities for the long-term unemployed must be part of the procurement process. Now, the recent report of the Scottish Affairs Committee into the heinous practice of blacklisting has shocked most members of this chamber, if not all. Many of us wish to see companies which have been known to be involved in blacklisting applicants because of their political views or because of their trade union membership, or simply because they have in the past raised legitimate concerns over health and safety issues. Most of us would like to see those companies being excluded from accessing public sector contracts. Many of the firms known to have used these blacklists are in the construction sector. However, action against blacklisting must be taken across the board and must include companies which might bid for the operation of the bridge. The issue about the operation of the bridge obviously took up a bit of time again, and I was interested to hear from Helen Needy about the good work of FETA. I know she has a lot of personal experience on that, and I too acknowledge the good work that FETA did over the years in developing things like the Park and Ride scheme and Hall Beath. On the issue of creeping privatisation, the problem, I think, for the committee was that we had no evidence presented to us that we could do anything else, that FETA could take this over. And that was a problem for the committee, and a problem that we couldn't really get over. Alex Johnson still, I feel, misunderstands what I was arguing. I'm not really talking about a continuation of the existence of the current scheme, which is not possible. And also, I'm not talking about councillors sort of invading Transport Scotland and dictating to Transport Scotland how they go about the operation of their assets. What I'm asking for is that there could be local council representation on the forum alongside the community council representation, and not just council official representation, because I don't think that's quite the same thing. The council officials are not accountable to people who vote. They're there, like civil servants. They're there when the politicians are long gone. So they do not have the same stimulus, if you like, to be responsive to the views of their constituents. And therefore, I think it would be appropriate for councillors to be on the forum which monitors the way in which the bridge is operated. That doesn't mean to say they'd be making decisions, but they would actually have an active part in scrutinising on behalf of their constituents. And I would also return to say that I hope that there would be the consideration given to the way in which the minutes of meetings of the forum are publicised and the way that's disseminated to members of the public. However, I would say that we will be supporting the bill at stage 3, and I do hope that the Minister, because it doesn't require, these considerations can be taken after the bill is passed, and I hope he will give some consideration to that.
Thank you very much. I now call on Keith Brown to wind up the debate. Minister, 8 minutes or thereabouts.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I thank all members for their contribution to what's been, I think, a generally very positive debate, apart from the one gratuitously controversial statement by Alec Johnson. I can apologise for getting Alec's name wrong 3 times yesterday. I seem to have infected Helen Eady with the same disease, so apologies for that, and I make sure I try and correct the record. On the issue of the name, I should say I've been scrupulous in making sure that I don't express any preference. I've not been involved in the selection of the shortlist, but I fear that Alec Johnson has done irreparable damage to his preferred option by his comments today, and let's hope that's not the case. I can also thank Elaine Murray for putting forward her amendment at stage 2. I hope that she will agree with me that, and the view of the ICI committee, that the make-up of the Forth Bridges Forum is appropriate for the type of activity that it's taking forward, and it will ultimately benefit the local community. I should also say, in relation to the comment she made about having contacted local councillors, we have to take the views of the councils rather than individual councillors. I'm sure she can understand that point, and it's worth mentioning the fact that neither Perth and Kinross Council nor West Lothian Council even responded to the call for evidence in relation to this bill. So I think we have to take the expressed views of the committee into account for this, and we've made our reasons clear for the constitution in terms of the membership of the forum. I also hope that members will welcome confirmation that the agendas and the minutes of the future forum meetings, a point again raised by Elaine Murray, are being made available online. I know that had been a concern previously. We don't believe that councillors need to be part of the forum to ask questions of ministers on the management and maintenance. It's worth pointing out that currently around 10% of of all correspondence that we receive on this very subject comes from councillors, proving, I think, that the current systems and the comments made, I think, by Alec Johnston, the ministerial responsibility that's there, rather than a specific provision within the bill about membership or even subsequently in regulations, we believe the current proposals are sufficient. Although the bill has been unamended since its introduction, and we were in fact listening to people's views, it's been acknowledged by a number of members across the chamber, the various things which we have listened to and agreed with, not least in relation to some of the concerns of the people currently comprising the staff of FETA. During the passage of the Forced Crossing Act, it was recognised that arrangements for the future maintenance and operation of the bridge had to be in place before the new Forth crossing opens. And subsequent analysis of the options provided, in our view, a clear way forward. And although the decision to dissolve FETA has not met with universal approval, I acknowledge that point. Retention of jobs, a guarantee in respect of staff pensions, the point made earlier, a cost-effective regime, which I think Annabel Ewing is right to say is very important, and the twin bridge management and maintenance strategy for the bridges emerged as the clear priorities. And I am glad that so many stakeholders and Parliament itself are agreed on those outcomes, and anticipate that once the new Forth crossing opens, we can agree on encouraging modal shift from car to public transport across the Forth estuary, which this bill will also facilitate. I think it's also worth saying, in relation to some of the earlier comments that were made about privatisation, that I have to point out that in an earlier iteration of the trunk roads maintenance contracts, the previous administration took exactly the same decision in terms of the trunk road contracts. They didn't seek to change that. And it is the case that councils, should they want to retain this in the public sector, could collaborate and put forward their own bid for the contract. That's quite feasible for them to do that. The various councils, it doesn't even have to be the councils which are nearest to the bridge, but councils can do that if they wanted to do that, as they've been able to do on their trunk roads contracts since the decision was taken in the mid-1990s to take them away from councils. So that is still possible. They have to apply to be on the tender list, and councils have previously applied to be in earlier versions of operating company contracts. I should say that FETA itself can't bid, but councils could get together and do that if they wanted to do that. I think, just to go back to the point about democratic accountability, elected representatives by local authorities are, I think, in a different category from local groups and local people that we've asked to be involved in the forum. They have a mandate of their own, and I think that's where the potential confusion comes in. I mean, I feel as strongly about this as I do about the requests that we're currently receiving from ministers to be involved in a council roads project, the Third Dawn crossing in Aberdeen. That's not the role for ministers to be involved in that. That's a local authority scheme, and it's right that they take it forward and they answer the concerns which are expressed there. Just as it's right, I think, again, as Alec Johnson said, when this is funded by central government, this project is funded by central government, that the lines of accountability are clear right through to the minister, who can't hide from the scrutiny which the Parliament can bring to bear. So I think that should, I would hope, assure those who are concerned about accountability that it will be there. And of course, as I've said, that councillors can raise issues, as I'm sure they will continue to do. I also say that the amendment which was drafted in Elaine Murray's name at stage 2 also only provided for that kind of scrutiny by the only person that has actually raised this issue out with the Parliament, the councillor from Edinburgh. That would have allowed only scrutiny of the Forth Road Bridge, and I don't think that was what was intended. Another reason, I think, perhaps why it was withdrawn. I have tried to respond to the various points which have been made and the concerns which have been raised by the staff, as I have mentioned. The guarantee in terms of pensions is not a straightforward or inexpensive thing to do. It is a substantial commitment that has been made by the Scottish Government, and we do that because we were listening to the concerns that are raised by staff members. I think Margaret McCulloch also raised issues around the TUPE and the level of protection that's there. Now, I know there have been, I know myself as a former shop steward, there have been concerns about how effective TUPE can be. But I would say that the TUC recently has been involved in engagement with the UK Government and has expressed itself generally satisfied by the provisions of TUPE, which can't allow gratuitous compulsory redundancies. There are obligations which pass to the contractor under TUPE. And I think perhaps the most important issue, as I mentioned already, is that which relates to the pensions, and we're given a guarantee in relation to that. On the point that was raised by Alec Johnson on tolls, the maiden speech which I made in this Parliament was one which welcomed the abolition of tolls. And listening to Helen Eadie, I'm aware that she was ahead of her time, as she said, in asking for a new crossing, and ahead of her time and out of step with her colleagues, I'm sure, in relation to the tolls as well. And I can only imagine how she jumped for joy when the SNP were elected and both these things became guaranteed in due course, because they certainly hadn't happened beforehand, despite the fact, as I've mentioned already in intervening with Alec Johnson, that the tolls should have been abolished in 1994. because that's when the capital costs of the original bridge had paid off. And it really is very important that governments, when they make a commitment like that in relation to tax or charges, that they follow that through. It should have been abolished in 1994, and I'm pleased it was the SNP administration which was able finally, with support from others, as has been mentioned, to abolish those tolls. And the idea they would go up to £4, I'd mentioned at stage one, I think, that that was a similar level to the Skye Bridge tolls, and once again I was very pleased to be involved in the campaign to abolish those tolls, even if I do still bear the conviction for having done so at the time. I think I've covered most of the contributions, which I think, as I say, were very positive. Interesting as well to hear from Richard Lyle about the early development of the bridge. I have to say I was but a babe in arms when it was still a ferry, so although I did cross, I was too young to remember having done so, but I've used the bridge, as most of us, all of us, have done since then, on many occasions. So I do look forward to continuing our effective engagement. I think the comments of individual members reflect the fact there has been effective engagement with stakeholders and with members and those most directly affected. Commencement of the bill is not scheduled until June 2015, and there is still quite a substantial amount of work to be done, not only on the arrangements for the cheapy transfer of staff, but also on the operating company contract to ensure it meets the commitments made during the passage of the bill, as well as commitments which have also been made to other stakeholders. I would therefore like to take the opportunity to put on record an offer to provide regular updates to the Infrastructure and Capital Investment Committee, including details of how the contract is developing, community engagement and the FETA staff transfer. The bridges over the Forth play a key part in keeping Scotland moving. I am grateful for the opportunity to be part of safeguarding the future of this vital link in Scotland's infrastructure, and I am therefore pleased to commend to Parliament the motion that the Forth Road Bridge Bill be passed.
Many thanks, Minister. That concludes the debate on motion number S4M 06605 on the Forth Road Bridge Bill, and it is now time to move on to the next item of business, which is the statement by Fergus Ewing on Scottish Coal Industry Sector Task Force. I'll allow a few seconds for members to change places. The Minister will take questions at the end of his statement, and therefore there should be no interventions or interruptions during the Minister's statement. I note that not all members are in the chamber who have indicated that they wish to participate in this question session, and I express disappointment at that. And I call on Fergus Ewing. 15 minutes, please, Minister.
Presiding Officer, let me begin by saying that I understand that the copies of the statement should have been made available just very shortly, very recently indeed, to you, and I would have far preferred that far more notice had been preferred, and I apologise for that, Presiding Officer. I felt it correct to say that, and to members whom I haven't been able to provide a copy of the statement because of other matters. Presiding Officer, over the past year, my officials and I have had extensive engagement with the open cast mining sector in Scotland. The sector employs 3,000 people directly and 4,500 indirectly. It contributes £450 million to the Scottish economy. It provides well-remunerated jobs with average wages of around £42,000 a year. It's vital to the economies of Ayrshire, Lanarkshire, Dumfries, Galloway and Fife and other parts of Scotland. It's part of the social fabric of Scotland, and mining communities are proud, strong and resilient ones. It became increasingly clear since around last autumn that the sector faced, as a result of the continuing low world coal prices, some very difficult financial challenges. As members will be aware, on the 19th of April, the Scottish Resources Group called in the liquidators. This led to an announcement of 604 job losses on April 19th this year. I have set up a task force to look at the issues facing the coal sector. The Scottish Open Cast Coal Industry Task Force is chaired by myself, and I am very pleased to have had cross-party MSP and MP representation as part of that group. The task force is equally well represented with its member stakeholders, including trade union officials, the local authorities most affected, landowners, SEPA and representation from the UK Department of Energy and Climate Change, DEC, and the Coal Authority and the Scotland Office. The task force met most recently on the 20th of May in Cumnock in Ayrshire, on Monday of this week, in an area that is no stranger to the devastating effects that the loss of work in the coal industry can bring to communities. The remit of the task force covers the immediate employment challenges, and the main focus is on securing re-employment of as many of the SRG workforce as possible. The task force is also to consider the restoration of open cast sites and the issues threatening the longer-term viability of the coal sector as a whole. Through our PACE initiative, we took immediate action to support those employees who had been made redundant. We held 4 redundancy support events: Tuesday 30th of April, Lanarkshire, on the 1st of May in Ayrshire and also in Alloa, and the 2nd of May in Fife. On the 17th of May, we invited all 604 redundant employees to make an appointment with a PACE advisor to identify their training needs or opportunities and to assist them if they wish to remain within the mining sector or to retrain to work within another sector. An important part of the reskilling efforts is the provision of driver training of large plant and machinery. The certification of this training and its transferability to other sectors, such as the construction sector, is a key enabler in the job market mobility for coal sector employees. The possibility of using some of the current SRG sites for this training is being explored as a potential option. Presiding Officer, in order to aid this process, additional funds of over £1 million have been made available through the Scottish Government's Employability Fund, administered by Skills Development Scotland. And it was agreed on Monday that a short-life working group to address the issue of training and certification ticketing be set up, and this group will meet shortly. I am pleased to update members that Hargreaves plc, a prospective buyer of the former SRG company, has been selected by KPMG, the liquidators, as preferred bidder for the former SRG business. Discussions between KPMG and Hargreaves are ongoing, and I stress this is not a signed or sealed deal as yet, but the interest shown by Hargreaves is encouraging and it is a serious bid. Hargreaves were invited to the last task force meeting and they attended. It was encouraging to hear from them their plans for the former SRG business. Their plans include estimates that they intend to re-employ around up to 300 people in Scotland in the first 6 months, and that this estimate may rise to around 500 people in the first 12 months of new operation. More details of the negotiation between Hargreaves and KPMG may be expected in the coming weeks as talks progress. However, councils were encouraged to open dialogue with Hargreaves at the earliest opportunity regarding sites located in their relevant council areas, and this is already underway. Members may be aware that Hargreaves are currently finalising the purchase of ATH, another coal operator and major employer in the Scottish open cast coal sector. Hargreaves' intervention in ATH has managed to maintain of the order of 230 jobs or thereabouts in Scotland by keeping ATH operating throughout a very difficult period for that company. We welcome that intervention by Hargreaves, Presiding Officer. East Ayrshire is one of the largest affected authorities, with the loss of 340 jobs in the area. Running in tandem with the National Task Force, East Ayrshire Council has set up their local task force. Douglas Reid, Council Leader, and Fiona Lees, their Chief Executive, provided an update to the task force on the East Ayrshire Council local task force as well. Presiding Officer, the issue of state aid has been discussed at length within the task force, and although it is clear that state aid support for the coal industry is extremely restrictive, we are continuing to explore fully if any avenues are open to us. This work is being carried out jointly by the Scottish Government and the UK Government through DEC. The Coalfields Regeneration Trust have provided an update to the task force on the Trust's work. The Coalfields Regeneration Trust was established to provide support to Scotland's former coal mining communities. From 2011 to 2014, the CRT will have received £2.5 million in grant from the Scottish Government to carry out their activities in former coalfield communities. I am pleased to say that the CRT are considering what more they can do and what role they can play too going forward. Presiding Officer, by far the biggest threat facing the future of the open-cast coal industry in Scotland is the proposed increase in track access charges for coal freight. The ORRR, the Office of the Rail Regulator proposal, has been out to consultation since March last year and is of grave concern due to the distance travelled element of the charge. The proposed charge would be levied on a per-kilometre travelled basis, which will mean that operators in Scotland who have the furthest distance to travel to the main markets in the south of England would be disproportionately affected, drastically undermining the competitiveness of the Scottish coal sector. Scottish operators and Scottish ministers, including myself and Mr Brown, who is with me in the chamber today, have responded to this consultation strongly, stating the case that these charges have the potential to destroy the Scottish open-cast coal sector. The Scottish Government continues to respect the statutory independence of the ORR in this matter, but it is vital that in reaching a decision on a charging regime, the ORR ensure that the wider impacts of these charges on the Scottish coal industry are fully considered. This was clear in the formal guidance that my colleague, Mr Brown, issued to the ORR last summer and in the representations made during our most recent discussions. The ORR attended the task force meeting on Monday, and I thank them for their attendance in what was clearly a difficult forum for them, in which they received very direct feedback from the industry. The ORR determination will be available on the 12th of June this year. At this point, the ORR will take further comments, with the final documentation expected later this year. The restoration of open-cast coal sites is a subject of great importance to the task force. Members may be aware that myself and my officials have been working closely with key stakeholders over the past 6 months to address the issues facing the Scottish coal industry, and we share the concerns raised by local communities around the responsible restoration of open-cast coal sites. I am therefore pleased to make members aware of the newly created Scottish Mines Restoration Trust, which will help facilitate the restoration of old open-cast coal mines across Scotland. Whilst our main concern on the task force is to retain as many of the existing coal jobs as possible, I would ask that members note that the restoration process in itself is expected over time to create potentially hundreds of jobs across the country, as well as restoring the local environment. The SMRT will be independent from the Scottish Government, with a board made up of representatives of local authorities and other stakeholders. The SMRT will not directly fund restoration. It is right that coal operators, presiding officer, will still be responsible for the restoration of their respective open-cast sites. However, these tasks are often complex, and the Trust will work with coal operators, local councils, landowners, communities and other bodies to facilitate the responsible and appropriate restoration of open-cast sites. I am sure that all members will agree that community engagement is a critical factor in the creation and deployment of restoration plans for open-cast sites, and I wish to assure members that community participation and engagement will be a prerequisite of SMRT involvement in the facilitation of restoration schemes. In summary, presiding officer, task force members are working well together. We are doing all we can to ensure continued employment in the coal industry in Scotland, with particular attention to areas most affected by the recent redundancies. We are assessing the threats and issues affecting the long-term viability of the coal sector, principally the ORR charging proposals, and we are working hard to ensure that the responsible and appropriate restoration of open-cast sites in Scotland takes place. In closing, presiding officer, I would like to take this opportunity to thank all of the members in this chamber who have taken part in the various pieces of work that I have described, principally the task force, and who are contributing in the debate today. These have been very trying times for the Scottish open-cast coal sector, and I pay tribute to the efforts made by all parties working together to find the best way forward. I am happy to answer questions that colleagues may have.
Thank you very much, Minister. Before we move on to questions, can I just advise the Chamber that on Tuesday afternoon of this week I had to advise members that business in the Chamber is usually on a follow-on basis, so there is no specific time set in stone for the start and end of business. Members who turn up late for a statement cannot expect to be called to ask questions if they have not heard that statement. However, on this occasion, the members who were late for the statement were only a few minutes late, and therefore I am minded to call them. If they would like to press the request to speak buttons now, along with other members who wish to be called to ask questions, then they will be given consideration. I call Ken McIntosh.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. My apologies, my misunderstanding at the start of the timing of the start of this debate, and it ran on. Can I also welcome the update from the Minister and thank him for the advance copy of this statement. on the Scottish Coal Task Force. Given that we're talking about more than 600 jobs directly affected by the collapse of SRG, our first concern must be for those individuals, their families and the others indirectly suffering as a result of those job losses. Can the Minister assure the Chamber that maintaining the maximum number of jobs will be at the forefront of his efforts and those of Scottish Government agencies? And as part of those efforts, I am led to believe that support for training for those affected may be limited to £200 per person. Can I ask the Minister if that is indeed the case and whether that is sufficient to access the courses and reskilling that may be required? I also understand from an answer the Minister gave, in fact, to a question from my colleague Neil Findlay, or the Minister Margaret Burgess gave to a colleague Neil Findlay, that the support offered by the Government does not include any new money. Can I ask him to confirm that that is also the case? Minister, it is my understanding that the liquidator, KPMG, is applying to the Court of Session to divest themselves of responsibility for the clean-up or restoration of the sites rejected by any potential buyer. Can I ask the Minister which authority will end up with responsibility for those mines should that approval be granted? And finally, Minister, the Government talks about the Scottish Government's grant to the Coalfields Regeneration Trust. That grant has been running at more than £1.5 million for at least each of the last 8 years. The Scottish Government has reduced that funding to just over £500,000 this year and next. Given the impact that is bound to have on already deprived and hard-hit communities, will the Minister reconsider his support for the excellent work of the Coalfields Regeneration Trust?
Minister.
Let me try and answer the questions raised. Yes, of course, I can confirm that my absolute concern is to ensure that as many people who are presently redundant have the offer of re-engagement as is practically possible. I think I have made that abundantly clear at both of the task force meetings that I have chaired thus far, and that is an absolute matter of resolute determination from me, and I believe all the members of the task force on all parties that are represented therein who have constituency interests. Secondly, in relation to training, it's not my belief that there is a threshold or ceiling, but I will check and I will come back specifically and write to the member on that, whether there is a ceiling of £200. That's not my belief, but I will look into that. There has been a sum allocated to training, a substantial sum, and that is money that has been allocated in the light of the gravity of the situation that we face. Could I perhaps suggest to members that at present it seems to me that the problem is not really how much money may be available per person. The main challenge is to find a way to enable the assessment to be conducted, the assessment necessary for in some cases for drivers to receive ticketing. This is a complex matter, and it's one where the NUM has been very active for a long period, and that is precisely why we have agreed at the task force meeting held in Cumnock on Monday of this week that a subgroup will be set up involving all relative parties, including Hargreaves, Kier Construction, the NUM, Russell Griggs, who is a prominent role, an extraordinarily prominent role in all of these matters, and other relevant people. The objective is to find a practical way forward, Presiding Officer. Let me reassure the Chamber and Mr Macintosh. As Energy Minister, money will not be a problem to sorting out these issues. The problems are practical, logistical. To get training, there needs to be a place for them to get training. That means a mine that is registered and licensed to operate safely, and therefore these are logistical issues primarily. But I will make sure that it will not be for the lack of money that we fail to solve these problems, and there is a clear will to do so. So I'm grateful to clarify that. The CRT do play a prominent role, working from the bottom up, as it were, with communities, and they will continue to perform that role. And lastly, in relation to the thorny issue of ownership, I believe, Presiding Officer, that the Scottish Government is party to these legal proceedings. It may well be, therefore, that they are sub judice to some extent, and therefore I would prefer, rather than fall foul of parliamentary procedure inadvertently, to write to the member to set out the response to that with clarity. I am not seeking to avoid the question, but I think I must respect the procedures which may apply, given that we have entered proceedings relatively recently, and therefore it may be inappropriate and unhelpful, really, for me to comment further on that specific matter. But I do undertake that every member will be informed as soon as possibly we can do so of the precise position in relation to these matters, as they are of legitimate public concern.
Thank you. Madam Fraser.
Thank you. Can I thank the Minister for his statement and for the advance notice? Can I also thank him for the invitation to be part of the Scottish Coal Industry Task Force? I was pleased to attend the first meeting some weeks ago. I'm afraid that due to other commitments I could not attend the meeting that was held this Monday, but I'm grateful to the Minister for the updates as to what is happening in that forum. Can I welcome today the interest that has been expressed from Hargreaves in purchasing the former SRG business? I think that will provide some assurance to at least some of the employees, former employees of SRG going forward. The Minister will remember that at the first meeting of the task force, he signed a letter which represented the view very strongly of that meeting that any buyer should purchase the entirety of SRG's business, including its liabilities, rather than just cherry-pick particular sites. Is he in a position to tell the Chamber whether or not Hargreaves are interested in purchasing the entire business, as was indicated at that meeting, or whether they are in the business of cherry-picking? And if the latter, can he give us any indication what might then happen to the remaining parts of SRG business which may not be profitable?
Minister.
Well, I thank Mr Fraser for his question, and he is correct that following the first meeting I did write to the liquidators expressing, I think, what was the view of the task force generally, and that view was that at that time, of course, there had been no announcement of the liquidator as to any preferred bidder. That matter was not by any means clear, and therefore I indicated at the request of the task force and all the members there, including members from parties in this chamber, that the preference of the task force was twofold. One, that a well-capitalised company should come in to take over coal operations, and two, that cherry-picking should be avoided. I don't think that it was ever suggested that there would be a solution that would answer every problem in relation to coaled-out mines. The letter is a matter of record, and I can pass a copy of it to Mr Fraser. But I do believe, and I should state for the record, that it is clear that Hargreaves is a well-capitalised company. That is beyond dispute. Information has been provided to that effect, and therefore it does seem to me that in welcoming the intervention of Hargreaves by ATH, that's a view that should receive the full support of all members in this chamber, and in welcoming the status of Hargreaves as preferred bidder for SRG, that seems to me to be entirely consistent with what the task force actually wants. Certainly at the meeting which Mr Fraser was unable to attend on Monday, the mood of the meeting was to welcome the commitment that Hargreaves is making, and a commitment that I believe extends to acknowledging their ongoing responsibility for environmental matters, for restoring the mines that they will be working, as well as carrying out coaling operations.
Thank you, Minister. I now call Willie Rennie.
Thanks to the Minister for the advanced copy of the statement and for his work in this area. I'm a member of the task force, but I've not been able to attend yet, much to my regret. I see no reference to a replacement for restoration bonds in his statement. I've been very concerned, I have to say, about the proposals to introduce a kind of pay-as-you-extract scheme to replace the bonds. Companies would only pay a fee for the coal that they extracted, which may not match the full cost of restoration. If a company collapses just before it extracts any coal, there may be no fund left to restore the big hole ripped out of the landscape. Can the Minister just maybe set out what his thoughts are in this area and whether he has concluded on this matter?
Thank you, Minister.
Yes, but I thank Willie Rennie for his question. And in response, I would say, first of all, that the issue of restoration is not a simple one. It is a thorny one. It is one with considerable challenges, and I think all members will recognise that that is the case. Traditionally, restoration bonds have been used. Restoration bonds can come in many shapes and forms as financial instruments, but essentially the common element is they provide an element of insurance cover to meet the costs of restoring the environment of a mine that's been coaled, in the same way that any insurance policy provides an amount of cover against specified events. Problems have arisen in two respects. First of all, the level of cover may be insufficient to meet the total cost of restoration in some instances, and there may therefore be a shortfall. That, I believe, will undoubtedly be the case in some cases, in some instances. Secondly, it is becoming increasingly difficult to obtain restoration bonds, and for that reason, for both of these reasons, we have been looking at this matter with a group since, I think, last October, i.e. before the task force was formed. We believe that we need to look at solutions going forward. For example, I understand another company operating coaling provides a parent company guarantee, and because of the extensive and robust financial standing of that company, that parent guarantee is accepted as sufficient cover. Now, these are matters where a financial judgment of financial experts obviously has a role to play. I can inform Mr Rennie that the next meeting of the task force is due to take place on the 1st of July at Cumnock, courtesy of East Ayrshire Council once again, and at that meeting it has been agreed at the previous meeting, the one that took place on Monday, that we will look extensively at this issue. I think Mr Rennie knows that in politics often there aren't any easy answers, but that if we work together using the new vehicle of the Scottish Mines Restoration Trust, we are far more likely to come up with solutions to what is undoubtedly a problem that is of concern to many communities throughout Scotland, and rightly so. And the last point I make is that no one is suggesting that responsibility should be shifted from the coal operators. The coal operators have responsibility, and that is acknowledged by responsible coal operators in Scotland, and that will therefore continue. The question really is how that can be made to work in practice in future, and that is a matter that is being looked at extremely seriously.
Thank you, Minister. Patrick Harvey.
Thank you. The Minister will be aware of the recent formation of the Scottish Open Cast Communities Alliance, an organisation bringing together the communities directly impacted by this industry from right across Scotland. Will he agree that all parties in this discussion should recognise that alliance and be willing to work with it to represent the people most directly impacted? And will he call on the Scottish Mines Restoration Trust routinely to ensure that its minutes are placed in the public domain?
Minister.
Well, obviously I want to work with all relevant stakeholders who have a contribution to make, and my understanding is that the SMRT fully intends to work with the communities most affected. I mean, plainly, as I said in my statement, and Mr Harvey will recollect, community engagement is an imperative and essential part of all the work that is done on a particular coaled-out mine. So I think it's really beyond question that one should work with the local community. Quite who speaks for the local community is an issue that has exercised many people from time to time, and that therefore should be looked at on a pragmatic basis, I suggest. As far as the SMRT is concerned, as I think Mr Harvey will know, it is a body independent of the Scottish Government, and rightly so. And therefore it is for the SMRT to decide how it will engage. But my understanding is that they fully intend to engage with appropriate representatives of those communities most affected.
Thank you. Willie Coffey.
Thank you very much. Could I firstly pay tribute to the work done by my colleague Adam Ingram, MSP, who, despite his current illness, has attended the important work of the task force on behalf of his constituents in Carrick, Cumnock and the Doon Valley. Could I ask the Minister to spell out for the Parliament the possible impact of the ORR's proposals to recommend this new freight-specific charge of £4.04 per 1,000 gross tonne miles?
Minister.
Yes, I thank Mr Coffey for that question, and I have been in contact on a very frequent basis with Mr Ingram, who, though still on sick leave at present time, is working hard for his constituents on these matters, as his area is one of the areas most affected in Scotland. Mr Coffey asks about the impact of the ORR's proposals in the sector. The data available from the industry in Scotland shows that the average total freight charge to transport a tonne of coal from Ayrshire to Ayr Valley Power Station in Yorkshire is around £8 to £10 per tonne. By way of comparison, the equivalent charge for a tonne delivered from Immingham, that's a Lincolnshire port, to Ayr Valley is £3 to £5 per tonne, and a tonne from a typical English mine closer to Ayr Valley may be £1.50 to £3 per tonne. Now, this shows that already, before any increases, that the mines and the businesses in Scotland bear a material cost disadvantage, and this ranges from between £3 to £8 per tonne delivered, and therefore the introduction of distance-related charging on a per-kilometre travel basis will lead to higher than average cost increases for Scottish coal supplied to English power stations. Therefore, Presiding Officer, it is absolutely clear that were these proposals from the ORR to be implemented, then there is a very serious risk that it would simply destroy the open-cast coal sector in Scotland. I was grateful that the ORR therefore appeared at the task force on Monday and the previous one. I thank them for their attendance. Dr Murray was there, for example, and I think it was perhaps a happy experience for the ORR. Strong points were made, but it was a dignified discussion. But the point was put by myself, as it happens, that if these charges were introduced, it may kill the industry in Scotland. I am therefore hopeful, very hopeful, that because there is a reasonable case based on evidence, some of which I have read out to the Chamber to show that it is serious evidence, that any regulator must, and I believe will, look carefully at this evidence in coming to a decision. But one of the reasons that I felt it appropriate to bring this statement to the Chamber today was to underscore the gravity of the predicament the industry currently faces, and I believe that I've been able to do so now.
Elaine Murray.
And having attended a briefing with the ORR at lunchtime, I am confident they have been listening to what people have been saying. But can I start by thanking the Minister for his statement? I didn't see the advance copy as I was in the Chamber, but as a member of the task force at the Minister's invitation, and I do thank him for that. I know that the task force is rightly concentrating on the immediate problems, first caused by the problems with ATH and now with SRG, both in terms of employment and restoration. However, can the Minister advise if it will be part of the remit of the task force to investigate how we could better progress economic development in coalfield areas such as Upper Nithsdale to ensure that in future their economies are less vulnerable to any future problems in that industry?
Minister.
Well, I thank Dr Elaine Murray for her attendance at the task force and her work for this issue as a constituency MSP, which has been over a fairly long period of not an inconsiderable amount of dialogue between us, which I'm grateful. The purpose of the Scottish Open Cast Coal Task Force is to consider issues relating to the open cast coal sector. That is quite a wide range of topics. There are, I think, nearly 50 people on the task force, convener, and I must say the 50 people have been pretty well behaved, so that's made my chairmanship role a pleasant and not a challenging one. But I think that it would be wrong to stray and extend the remit of this particular group to an extremely wide omnibus economic development role, especially since East Ayrshire Council has its own local task force. However, and therefore I think we really should focus in on this topic and continue to do that. We have to focus, as Mr Harvey said and Mr Fraser said, on the, Mr Rennie said, on the issue of bonding and restoration. I think if we do that and we can move that issue forward and we can progress things, and I am confident that we will do that, incidentally, then we will have done a good thing for Scotland. I think it would make it might impair the chances of us focusing on that important task were our remit to be extended and the remit of the task force to be radically changed. However, I can say to Dr Elaine Murray that I have personally asked Dr Lena Wilson to ensure that every possible attention is given to the areas most affected, and I believe that 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 is the service that will be received through Scottish Enterprise and through all other relevant personnel, including, of course, the SDS and the PACE team. And I absolutely accept the general point that, of course, it is imperative that we look at what other options there are that can be explored for diversifying the economy from the coal sector.
Thank you. I have to say, if I have any hope of calling all of the members who wish to ask questions, then perhaps questions and answers could be slightly shorter. Annabel Ewing.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I thank the Minister for his statement. And I wonder if he could explain in a wee bit more detail what progress is being made in respect of the work of the task force, in particular as far as issues relating to Fife are concerned.
Minister.
Well, I'm first of all very pleased that we have representatives from Fife Council. Alex Rowley attended last meeting, as did Keith Winter, one of the senior officials involved, and Claire Baker had attended the previous task force meeting, I believe. And plainly, the work of the task force is to look at all of the parts of Scotland that are affected. There's particular issues in Fife in relation to restoration, and these are being considered in great detail by the local authority, by the Coal Authority, by Russell Griggs, and by SEPA and by other relevant stakeholders to see if we can make progress regarding the restoration of mines in Fife, and I think in particular Muirdean, which presents particular challenges. Now, these are just not easy matters, Presiding Officer. The point of a task force is to bring people together, to work together in a swift and focused fashion. That is happening, and I'm confident that that work should deliver fruitful results.
Mike Mackenzie.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Does the Minister agree that, given the repeated warnings from Ofgem about the lack of electricity generation capacity and the prospect for the lights to go off, that Scottish coal can continue to play its part in supplying power stations across the UK alongside other forms of energy generation such as renewables?
Minister.
Yes, Mr Mackenzie is absolutely right. The regulator Ofgem warned last October that the spare generating capacity in the UK was considerably lower than it should be. The figure in respect of England, I believe, is that the spare generating capacity was around 4%, which is far less than is a safe and prudent level. Since last October, there have been further closure, I believe, of coal stations, and therefore the figure last October can only have worsened. This, to me, is one of the most serious issues facing Scotland and the UK today. And, of course, Scotland has a spare margin of around 25% of generating capacity, and our grid capacity to export to England our electricity is being quadrupled at the agreement of the regulators to allow our electricity to be exported down south to keep the lights on of our good friends in England. And therefore, Mr Mackenzie is quite right to point out that were the threatened charges of the ORR to be implemented, and were the expectations of industry to be realised that they would be unable to continue to operate because they would be loss-making, there would be a very severe potential consequence on electricity supply on the UK at a time when, as I have painted, the picture is pretty bleak.
Claire Baker.
You mentioned the closure of the Muirdean open cast in Fife last week, and there are significant environmental concerns with this site. And while the bond is in place, it may not be sufficient. Although the SMRT has been established, it's not clear how this would address a situation such as Muirdean. And while we are waiting for a solution, how will sites which are currently in limbo be maintained and secured and communities protected? We're already having reports of pollution concerns at Muirdean.
Minister.
Well, these matters are serious matters, but they're not new matters. I mean, the general issue of restoration has been around for a long, long time. What is new is that we have put in place a mechanism in the form of the Scottish Mines Restoration Trust, which seeks to facilitate solutions and provides a focus and a purpose which hitherto has not existed. I think that's a good thing. I hope that other members welcome it. I certainly think it's a very good idea that when you have a complex problem involving multi-parties, you bring them together to find a solution. That is what the SMRT will do. And moreover, Presiding Officer, it was announced at the task force meeting on Monday at Cumnock that the sum of £1.1 million has been provided to the SMRT, which will assist it in performing functions. For example, obtaining any necessary reports, technical reports, consultants' reports, environmental reports, information, engaging the types of people whose advice is a sine qua non of finding these successful solutions. Now, I think the SMRT's role will not be a panacea, nor is it a funding body primarily. It is a facilitating body, but I do believe that its existence will help us tackle challenges such as Muirdean far more readily. And the last thing I would say is that I know that the local authority, working with the stakeholders that I mentioned in the previous answer by Annabel Ewing, are working extremely hard in relation to Muirdean. I can assure this chamber that it is receiving full, thorough, comprehensive attention. I cannot and will not undertake that there will be outcomes that I cannot guarantee. That would be utterly irresponsible. But I am confident that everything that can be done is being done.
Joan McAlpine.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I also reiterate the comments praising my colleague Adam Ingram? And can I also take this opportunity to thank Russell Griggs, my constituent, for the hard work that he's put into finding solutions to these very complex problems? And can I ask the Minister to give us an update on the situation in Glenmucklock, and in particular any jobs that could be generated there by the restoration of the open cast site? Minister.
Yes, I thank Jo McAlpin for that answer, and she has also played a substantial role over a long period in these matters in relation to her constituents. Could I say that as it happened, I met with John Glenn of Clew Estates earlier today, and we are in regular contact with him, as Russell Griggs has had a massive involvement in this issue of late. I am very hopeful that progress can be made at Glenmucklock, which may allow a restoration project to proceed. I think that other members are aware of the work that is being done and the goodwill with which all parties involved are pursuing the objective of restoration of that site. Were that to happen, of course, I think it would be a fillip and give succour to all of those throughout Scotland who want to see other mines being restored too.
Thank you. David Torrance.
To ask the Minister, following the announcement that Hargreaves has bought the rights to take over the assets of Aardvark, what details are available about the plans for Aardvark's Fife operation and the jobs it supports?
Minister.
Well, I can tell David Torrance in respect of Fife that Hargreaves are in discussions with Fife Council around the sites concerned. It is too soon, I think, to make an announcement as discussions continue on various solutions. But I can assure him that work is continuing and councils have been invited by Hargreaves to continue the dialogue on a site-by-site basis.
Claudia Beamish.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. In view of the SRMT not directly funding restoration and considering the perceived, at least, varying robustness of local authority arrangements for restoration bonds, can the Minister reassure the Chamber that this will be looked at on a Scotland-wide basis to properly protect communities?
Minister.
Well, yes, I think I can give the assurance the member seeks that the purpose of the task force is to look at this issue strategically and comprehensively, and that is why on the next meeting of the task force at the 1st of July, we will be receiving, I expect, a number of presentations from all of those who have a material interest and contribution to make, and I very much hope that thereafter we can see progress being made.
Thank you. Colin Beattie.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I would ask the Minister what opportunities there are to focus on and develop the transferable skills of workers affected by the collapse of Scottish coal.
Minister.
Well, these are highly skilled workers, and the skills, to some extent, can be transferred to other sectors. I think most obviously the construction sector, and therefore, in order to enable those skills to be recognised in other sectors, the Short Life Working Group will be looking precisely at what certification may be required to secure that objective, to make sure that those people who may wish to pursue a different career, for example construction, are enabled to do so by having access to the assessment necessary to secure that certification. It is the access for the assessment, i.e. carrying out the driving under supervision, that is important. The second point I make is that in the restoration of mines, it will be expected that many jobs, possibly hundreds of jobs, will be created, and we will also be exploring the possibility, in relation to the restoration, that training and assessment can be carried out in relation to sites that are being restored, and actually take part and complete some of the restoration work in the course of completing their training. That would be an imaginative way, I think, of seeking to constrain the restoration costs, and perhaps therefore be part of the imaginative solutions that we are seeking to solve what is a thorny problem of, I suspect, really several decades' duration.
Many thanks, Minister. Chick Brodie.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. The Minister has wrestled with this immediate problem facing the industry, and I welcome the speedy action that he has taken thus far. But we have to think forward. On the basis that he has indicated some monies will be available to soften the blow on the communities affected, will the Minister consider working with local councils by initiating research into geothermal energy opportunities and therefore big job opportunities for the provision of district heating networks through the potential of tapping into the warm water that runs through the disused coal mines in the areas affected?
Minister.
Well, there's a wide range of topics raised there, but I can inform Mr Brodie that I am expecting a report to be provided to me, which was commissioned some time ago, as to the potential benefits that Scotland may derive from our untapped geothermal resource. And in the course of that, we will most certainly consider whether that potential includes any opportunities in relation to disused mines.
Thank you very much, Minister. And that concludes the statement on the Scottish Coal Industry Sector Task Force. We will now move to the next item of business, and I'll allow a few moments for members to change places. The next item of business is a debate on motion number S4M 06524 in the name of Fiona MacLeod on the National Trust for Scotland Governance, etc. Bill. No amendments to the bill have been lodged, so we move straight to the debate on the motion to pass the bill. And can I invite members who wish to speak in this debate to press the request to speak buttons now, please. And I call on Fiona MacLeod to speak to and move the motion on behalf of the committee, with around 5 minutes to do so.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I rise, as you say, as the convener of the National Trust for Scotland Bill Committee. It's only a short month since we debated the preliminary stage of this bill in Parliament, and at that time I gave a number of thanks, and I wish to reiterate them at this final stage of the bill. I wish to thank my fellow committee members, to the witnesses who gave evidence, both written and oral, and especially to the clerks and to Spice, who supported us throughout this short bill procedure. At that preliminary stage debate on the 23rd of April, I rehearsed the background and the necessity for this bill. and members will recall that it was the 2008 financial crisis within the National Trust for Scotland that precipitated a lot of the problems that this bill looks to solve. And what was discovered in that financial crisis, that actually a lot of it was rooted in poor governance procedures within the National Trust. And that led to the setting up of the Reid Review under our former presiding officer, Sir George Reid. And his report, entitled Fit for Purpose, was published in 2010. And in that report and that review, Sir George was clear that there was a need to restructure and to refocus the National Trust for Scotland's governance procedures. And much of that has taken place since then, in the 3 short years since that report was published. But this bill completes legislatively the recommendations of the Reid report from 2010. And I think it's important to also add that there is still ongoing work in terms of this restructuring and refocusing out with the legislative process, because the National Trust for Scotland has engaged in this review with a great deal of enthusiasm and commitment. So they're still looking at an audit of all their assets. It seems strange that an organisation that owns so much within Scotland, or is the custodian of so much within Scotland, still needs to know exactly what it is, what their assets are. And one of the items that I think is really important and look forward to seeing come to fruition is the introduction of local assemblies. And that is really quite important when you realise that the National Trust for Scotland is a membership organisation that has 310,000 members. And to say that on an annual basis at a meeting you can actually work with all those members, I think is perhaps a little far-fetched. And so I think the introduction of local assemblies will bring that membership much more into the whole structure and function of the National Trust for Scotland. But I wanted to spend a little bit of time today talking about the consultation review process, because I think it is perhaps an exemplar. Sir George Reid held 32 presentations. There were 140 meetings with small groups, 9,061 responses to the membership's questionnaire, a website forum, email and, of course, the old-fashioned letters. So I think it's a testament to that consultation process that this bill has come through Parliament with no objections at any stage and with no amendments introduced, either at the consideration stage or today at the final stage. So that testament was also seen at the 2010 AGM of the National Trust for Scotland, when the membership voted 424 to 2 to accept the recommendations of Sir George Reid's Fit for Purpose report. So in this short debate, I want to conclude by saying that I think this is a small but perfect bill, and I think the process that's been through has shown that. So in finishing, Presiding Officer, I move that the Parliament agrees that the National Trust for Scotland Governance etc. Bill be passed. Thank you.
Many thanks. I now call on Fiona Hislop, a generous 4 minutes.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm delighted to be here for the final stage of the bill. I want to start by recognising the support offered by members across all parties for the National Trust for Scotland during its modernisation programme and specifically over this bill. And I know this solidarity reflects the esteem and the affection which is felt for the Trust across the country. I'd also want to put on record my thanks to the committee for their diligent work in taking forward the responsibilities in relation to this private bill. I don't need to remind members of the vital role of the Trust plays in our national life, and no matter how familiar we are with the Trust, it is easy to underestimate the sheer scale of its work. It's not just the physical scale, impressive as that is. What always impresses me is the human scale. Visitors in their millions, 314,000 members, slightly more than was referred to by the convener of the committee, but perhaps that's growth during the process of the bill's travel during in the Parliament, hundreds of volunteers, the thousands staff or those who support the Trust's work through legacies or donations. And I hope members have not been too busy to watch the BBC's superb series on the wildlife of the Hebrides. Recently, we saw one of the iconic images of Scotland, St Kilda, and its teeming bird cliffs. And it's an interesting reflection that the Trust has more than twice as many members as there are gannets on St Kilda, and we know there are a lot of gannets on St Kilda. So inspiration, dedication and sheer hard work. The Trust is in it for the long term and for everyone who loves Scotland and its superb heritage and landscape. It rightly receives support from Government for many of its activities, ranging from state-of-the-art visitor centres to traditional farming practices. But the resources which we provide are far outweighed by those brought by its members, its volunteers and other supporters. And as members know, the Trust is completing a programme of reform as set out by Fiona MacLeod. Central to this is operational and financial sustainability. This bill will contribute significantly to allowing the Trust to develop a modern and business-like approach across all its operations. The Trust is not alone in needing vision and a sustainable business model to deliver benefits to the nation. That need applies across the whole heritage sector. And that is why I have just launched a public consultation on proposals to establish a high-level strategy for Scotland's historic environment, and also on provisions to create a new lead body to carry out the roles appropriate to national government in this area. And the Trust has already been involved in discussions on these matters. It was quick to welcome the public consultation and to affirm its willingness to continue to work as a partner in developing an inclusive strategy to get the best out of our diverse heritage landscape. And I welcome this positive approach. And the Trust has knowledge and experience which complements those of Government and its agencies. And there are many bodies working for the good of Scotland, and for them all, growing together must surely be better strategy than working in isolation. We are committed to working with the Trust to ensure the continuation of its distinctive role as a key player in sustaining our heritage, and I'm quite clear in terms of what their contribution is, that they acknowledge their responsibility to the nation, and I think that's an important part of the Trust's role and responsibility. Our aim is a collaborative sector where healthy competition drives all players towards higher standards and a greater realisation of the potential benefits that our heritage can deliver in economic terms, educational, cultural and social terms. And our final consideration of this bill offers this Parliament a valuable opportunity to reaffirm the value of partnership working between Government and the third sector. This Government believes in developing and maintaining partnerships and creating new synergies across Scotland. We need a strong and well-managed National Trust, for Scotland is a key player in delivering our vision in terms of the conservation of Scotland's rich cultural and natural heritage, environmental awareness and education. And we need it to continue its role as a significant contributor of economic benefit to the nation and to local communities, particularly in remote and rural areas. I therefore affirm my full support and this Government's full support for this bill and ask you to join me in speeding its passage towards completion.
Many thanks. And we now move to the open debate. Generous 4-minute speeches at this time. Call on James Dornan to be followed by Patricia Ferguson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. It's been a great privilege to sit in this committee and to work closely with my colleagues Fiona MacLeod, Jane Baxter and Jamie McGregor, as well as the Clerk's team who have been of great assistance to the committee members. My one complaint is that we never took the opportunity to go on a couple of visits. I'd also like to compliment the witnesses and all the people who took part in the Reid report, a great piece of work which Fiona has already talked about. As I said before, Scotland is some of the finest cultural and natural heritage to be found anywhere in the world, and protection for future generations is something we should all strive to. The work of the National Trust for Scotland is integral in achieving the same. And because the work is so important, it's imperative that we have a governance structure for the National Trust which works. In my view, this bill provides that. It may surprise some of you to know that 43% of the National Trust's work is undertaken in the west of Scotland. And I recently met with Robert Ferguson, General Manager for the National Trust in Glasgow and the west of Scotland, to discuss the Trust generally, and more specifically the two National Trust properties that I have in my own constituency of Cathcart, Homewood House and Pollock House. Both properties are real treasures. Homewood House, described as Alexander Greek Thomson's finest domestic design, was built for James Cooper in 1857, and work is currently going on to restore this building back to its former glory. But I want to concentrate today on Pollock House, based in the centre of Pollock Park and just a stone's throw away from the famous Burrell collection. Pollock House is regarded as one of Scotland's grandest Edwardian country homes and dates back to the 13th century. But significant for the National Trust, mainly due to its long-standing connection to founding member and owner of Pollock House, Sir John Stirling Maxwell, who served as the Trust's first Vice-President and was later President from 1943 till his death in 1956. More important is the role that Pollock House played in the creation of the Trust, as the idea of it, I was informed, started there with Sir John. He was a man who recognised very early of the importance of green spaces within the city, and as early as 1911 took steps to protect Pollock Estate and allow wider public access to it. And Scotland's first conservation agreement in 1939 originated in Pollock House. John Stirling Maxwell led by example and created the first conservation agreement for Pollock Park. It is no accident that the estate is proliferated by sports clubs around its boundaries. Pollock House is now owned by Glasgow City Council as part of the estate which was gifted to the city by the daughter of Sir John Stirling Maxwell on his death, but since 1993 has been leased and managed by the National Trust. It is one of a number of properties across Scotland that follows this model of management. The house is now open 12 months a year and has over 80,000 visitors annually. National Trust have worked in partnership with others to make Pollock House more of a country house, more recently having been exploiting the popularity of Downtown Abbey and have looked to create more of an upstairs-downstairs presentation in the house. I know which part I'd probably be living in. This innovative thinking is particularly important for buildings such as Pollock House and Homewood House, who are relatively off the beaten track for tourists. It's no coincidence that a large proportion of visitors to Pollock House come from the local area. So it's maybe at this point that I suggest that to help Pollock House and Homewood House, for that matter, to get some of the publicity and to attract more tourists to them, that might be an idea for the Minister to come and visit it sometime soon to see all the good work that's going on in there. Presiding Officer, changing the governance structure will not only positively affect the properties managed by the National Trust for Scotland, but could also act as an example of good practice for other stakeholders across the country to secure the future of places like Pollock House, Homewood House and many other culturally significant sites and properties across Scotland. Presiding Officer, as the Chamber is aware, I am extremely proud to represent my home constituency. It is in many ways the centre of Scotland's political and cultural universe, as is seen by the fact that Host Hampden, the home of Scottish football, was home to John Maclean, socialist and supporter of Home Rule for Scotland, and, of course, home for many years to Madam Acoss, our very own Winnie Ewing, and her illustrious offspring, I hastily add. I am delighted to say that, thanks to being in this committee, I am now aware of the importance of Pollock House and its history, so I am confidently willing to add one more to that venerable list: Glasgow Cathcart, original home of the National Trust. Thank you.
Thank you. Now call on Patricia Ferguson to be followed by Jamie McGregor.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. As we discussed in our debate in March, the case for reform of NTS is overwhelming, and that fact was underlined by the report Fit for Purpose published by the review team led by Sir George Reid. This was a comprehensive report full of interesting and important facts and figures, all of which helped the review team to make the case for reform of the NTS governance structures. For me, one of the most telling sections of the report was headed up "What You Said." In this section, comments made by staff, council members and funders were gathered together and helped to illuminate the depth and scale of the problem, and also gave a hint as to what the future might be for NTS if it didn't reform. So let me share just 3 of those comments with the Chamber, because they are worthy of repeating. A council member said, "The governance is dysfunctional. There is a pervasive mindset among staff and those on the board and the council that personal and sectional interests are more important than the interests of NTS as a whole." A member of staff suggested that too much of our time goes on serving the governance structure and not enough on doing our job. And equally worrying, a major funder said, "Why should I put money into NTS if they're all chasing each other's tails? I want to, but I can't until they are clear where they're going and why." The review Sir George and his team led has been thorough, and it has also reached out to the membership, as the committee convener indicated, with over 9,000 members responding to a questionnaire and another 2,000 attending the over 32 meetings held throughout the country. In the light of the evidence it received, the review team concluded
that the Trust was not sustainable in its present form and that financially it was in poor shape, with legacies being used as ready income to be spent, projects delayed until money was found, and, of course, sadly, the selling of assets to make the books balance. But perhaps the most damning indictment of the current structure is that there was no single database or inventory of its assets. So it is clear that what worked 80 years ago needs to be updated if NTS is to thrive and is to meet its core task, as specified in the 1935 Act, which was to promote the permanent preservation for the benefit of the nation of lands and buildings in Scotland of historic or national interest or natural beauty. Presiding Officer, the National Trust preserves the past for the future. So let us hope that the problems identified are now in the past. NTS has begun to move on and has embarked on a programme of work to prepare for the provisions of this bill and to rearrange its governance procedures. The local assemblies referred to by the committee convener give real strength to the new governance and provide a real role for the membership at large. Presiding Officer, Sir George and his team have been widely praised for the work they have done and the report they have delivered. It was a comprehensive job, and they deserve our thanks too for helping to preserve the national treasure that is the National Trust. I was very struck by the contribution of James Dornan for two reasons. One, I was sorry to hear that the committee hadn't gone about one or two visits in order to better understand the work of the NTS on a day-to-day basis. And I would recommend to him St Kilda, as the Minister referred to, if ever he gets the opportunity to go there, not just because it's in the most remote part of Scotland. Mr Dornan will not take that badly from me, I hope, but because it is a genuinely amazing place with the most wonderful scenery and an atmosphere that I have never experienced anywhere else. And I'm grateful for to the National Trust for facilitating my visit there a number of years ago. But I would also say to Mr Dornan, as someone who has over many years regularly visited Pollock House and its environs, that he's absolutely right to sing its praises. And I'm sure that the Minister would very much enjoy a visit to Pollock House and would find it the most interesting of places. Its setting, amongst other things, helps to make it a particularly special part of Glasgow's heritage and what Glasgow has to offer for the tourist and for the home visitor. Presiding Officer, Scottish Labour very much supports this bill, and in closing, can I congratulate the members of the committee, the clerks and Spice for the work they have done in scrutinising this bill, and offer my good wishes to the staff and members of NTS as they look forward to the new era which this piece of legislation heralds.
Many thanks. I now call on Mr McGregor, after which we'll move to the closing speeches. Mr McGregor, a generous 4 minutes, but no more than 5.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, Deputy Presiding Officer. And like others, can I begin by thanking the clerking team, ably led by Joanna Hardy, and my colleagues on the committee, who were well served under the convenership of Fiona MacLeod. I also extend my thanks to the witnesses who appeared before us and whose wise counsel guided our thinking. And lastly, I wish to thank my friend Alex Ferguson, MSP, for speaking on my behalf at stage 1. This bill can perhaps be described as a technical piece of legislation whose aim is to tidy up existing and somewhat archaic governance in the National Trust for Scotland, and it should be uncontentious in its nature. That does not, however, detract from the very serious necessity of bringing it forward, following adverse publicity and the resignation of the chairman 3 years ago, a time when the Trust was engulfed in financial crises with 65 redundancies and the closure of several of its loss-making properties. And I therefore pay great tribute to Sir George Reid for his intensive and far-reaching inquiry, which resulted in the fit-for-purpose report of the Strategic Review of the National Trust for Scotland. Sir George's 2-year examination into how the Trust was run rightly highlighted what he described as in his inimitable way as Byzantine in its governance, and pointed to a lack of strategic direction and an inability to deal with problems. He also told the committee that he was enthused by the positive attitude to change to his findings. And reform was inevitable, and this was reflected in the views of the Trust members, who overwhelmingly voted in favour of change at their AGM in 2010, which saw the Trust streamlined, replacing 2 boards with 1. It's no surprise. The Trust
has been able to implement the Reid recommendations within the 1935 order, which avoided the necessity of primary legislation. And it is no surprise that the management of the Trust was so chaotic when one considers that the number of trustees was nearly 90, and that has now thankfully been reduced down to 15. The Blakenham Review of the National Trust in England and Wales and Northern Ireland in 2003 concluded that the decision-making framework was overly complex and led to a lack of clarity and also duplication of staff effort. And I'm sure the Reid Review must have studied this closely in coming up with their own recommendations. Turning to the bill before us today, one of the key comments made by Sir Kenneth Calman was that this legislation will remove the responsibility of the Honourable President and the Hon Vice Presidents to attend board meetings, thus ending potential conflict of interests, a move commended by the OSCR for seeking to create greater clarity. They kept the provisions of up to 4 co-opted members, which is sensible to provide specialised expertise, and would like to keep these co-opted members for more than a year if necessary. The other most striking, if not obvious, and also the 1935 order at present provides for the Governing Council to include various representatives of public or scientific bodies. The Reid Review recommended at recommendations 3 that there should be no representative members of the Council. The rationale for this recommendation was that there are now more appropriate mechanisms for ensuring coordination, expert advice and policy development at a national level. And this was endorsed by the OSCR, which referred to and welcomed the recommendations at page 19 of its guidance. The other most striking, if not obvious, recommendation contained in the bill relates to the establishment of the Trust of a 5-year plan, which is eminently sensible, as is the suggestion that an audit of the assets should take place, which Patricia Ferguson mentioned. I was also interested in the title being rather snappier than the somewhat cumbersome National Trust for Scotland for Places of Historic Interest or Natural Beauty, which, after all, was a throwback to the 1930s. I said at the outset, this private bill is technical in its nature, but necessary in its content, and I have no hesitation in commending it to the Chamber. And lastly, Presiding Officer, I would like to agree with Patricia Ferguson that everybody should visit St Kilda. I've done so twice myself. It is one of the great wonders of the world, and so is the inn there, which is known as the Puff Inn.
Many thanks for that. Now call on Fiona Hislop, Cabinet Secretary. 4 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for members for their involvement in this debate this afternoon and their comments. I did say that the Bill Committee was diligent in their actions, perhaps not as diligent as they might have been, and I would encourage committee members, just because we're moving to the closing stages of this bill doesn't mean that they can't in the future ensure that they do visit National Trust for Scotland properties on a regular basis, and I certainly welcome the invitation to visit Pollock House. I think James Dornan's speech was a very effective reminder that people feel passionate about the places that surround them. The stories are, of course, of people, perhaps the stories of people who worked the land, who served in the houses, but also about the wealth creation of Scotland and an understanding of our nation and how it's developed. I also would want to put on record the Scottish Government's full support for the proposals. We look forward to continuing the excellent working relationship with the Trust as we move forward at this exciting time. And in terms of thanks, we've heard a great deal about the role that Sir George Reid's review had in taking us to where we are just now. But I also would like to put on record our thanks to Sir Kenneth Calman and Kate Maver, the Chair and Chief Executive of the National Trust, for their current leadership and how they are driving forward the change agenda. The work of the Trust links with a remarkable cross-section of the Government's work. In terms of the different areas, the importance of the National Trust of Scotland's work in relation to the culture and heritage agenda, agenda, the natural environment agenda, to local communities and to the economy. But also, I think importantly, their positive, collaborative and forward-looking approach that they set as an example to many other charities involved in the field, and encouraging them not to work in partnership just with government but also with each other and different organisations. And when we come to heritage, that's more important than ever before. This debate has provided us an opportunity to appreciate the challenges that the Trust has faced in recent years. I think Patricia Ferguson, in the quote she used, set out quite clearly what was a very challenging position, not just for staff but trustees and others. And we also should recognise how positively the Trust has responded. Its modernisation and refocusing have been determined, efficient and effective, and I know its return to good health has been welcomed by all in the Chamber today. And I can think no better way to mark this than approving the bill's passage towards the statute book, thus helping to secure a sustainable future for a body which is part of our national heritage, as we have heard, in its own right. And the needs of our heritage are many. Resources will be scarcer than we perhaps would wish. And even in these challenging economic times, we must renew our drive to make sure that collaboration and cooperation helps benefit all organisations in this area. The Government is consulting, as I said, on a strategy to ensure that we can work with partners on the highest priorities, and we are committed to making sure that process allows the work of the National Trust in the historic environment sphere to be situated in the firmest possible policy context, while guaranteeing its independence as a vital partner and a critical friend. And all of the many bodies and individuals who care so much about our incomparable heritage will have to work hard together to sustain our heritage in the future. So the coming years will be a period where many opportunities will present themselves. We recognise that the National Trust will be a key partner and a key leader in enabling Scotland to take full advantage of these opportunities. And we need in Scotland a National Trust which is vibrant, efficient and effective, independent in governance and spirit, yet contributing as a key player and working as a partner of government and communities at a national and a local level, helping to conserve and to unlock social, cultural and economic benefits to the benefit of all. So by passing this bill, we will help to ensure the Trust can continue on its course as a leading conservation charity with a modern governance structure, sustainably managed and fit to serve the people of Scotland and respond to the challenges and opportunities of the 21st century. And in closing, Presiding Officer, as somebody who was originally from Ayrshire, I'm sure you would join me in recognising particularly Clane Castle as an excellent example of the NTS's work on the natural environment, but also the built environment. And I think, in terms of experience, is another shining example of the fantastic work that National Trust contributes to Scotland.
Thank you, and indeed I share your enthusiasm for Clane Castle. Now call on Jane Baxter to wind up on behalf of the committee. 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I am very pleased to sum up on behalf of the committee in this final stage debate of the National Trust for Scotland Bill. As members will recall, we have already explored the background of this bill during the preliminary stage. At that time, and again in today's debate, we heard of the history which led to this bill and the committee's consideration of the broad principles behind it. During the progress of this legislation, what has been clear from the contributions of everyone is the esteem and regard with which the National Trust for Scotland is held and its distinctive role in preserving Scotland's heritage. And perhaps rightly so for an organisation which is so integral to preserving the historic and natural beauty of many of Scotland's most prominent and recognisable landmarks and places, the Trust is similarly embedded in the structures of Scottish public life. However, as with our historic houses or scenic places, the world has moved on, and the Trust now inhabits quite a different place to when it was established in the 1930s. Previous contributions to this debate have highlighted the cumbersome and cluttered governance arrangements which dominated the organisation until the Reid Review. We have heard of the outcomes of the Reid Review and the views of Oscar with regards to best practice for the Board of Trustees. We know that the 1935 order which established the Trust provided for certain public or scientific bodies to nominate representatives on the Board of Trustees of the Trust. Such members are known as representative members. Back in the 30s, when the Trust was newly constituted and building its capacity across Scotland, there was certainly a case for drawing from a broad base of experience. However, while this representative body aspect of the board members has changed, the committee, in taking evidence, was keen to establish that the Trust would continue to draw on the expertise that exists in other specialist organisations. And it's not just specialist input that the committee was keen to retain for the Trust, but also its relevance to communities right across Scotland. In his evidence, Sir George Reid described the structure of regional fora and local assemblies established in response to recommendations in the Reid Review, which are open to external bodies. He also pointed to the range of pan-Scotland bodies which exist to bring representatives of different bodies together to work on specific issues. Sir George went on to outline the role new media have to play in sharing ideas and expertise. Alongside all of this, he asserted that the Trust listens. And I know that the Trust will have listened to the contributions from members during the passage of this bill. The committee also heard from Sir Kenneth Calman, who made an important distinction when he explained that the changes to the board was not about abolishing external specialist expertise. It is about abolishing the role of that expertise in the governance structure. Sir Kenneth described for the committee the partnership events which allow the sharing of information and experience, and described a couple of specific examples, such as the Trust's work with the National Library of Scotland to record various collections held in libraries within the Trust portfolio. Similarly, we heard of the task-based focus group which has been established to look at problems with the Harling on Hill House in Helensburgh. We understand that representative members have already been removed from the Board of Trustees following on from the Reid Review, as the Trust has the ability to alter the 1935 order to allow this. However, we were persuaded that codifying the abolition of representative members through the provision in this bill will safeguard these new arrangements. So while this provision will have no practical effect on current membership of the Board of Trustees, it will ensure that the new streamlined arrangements persist and cannot be unpicked. This is to be welcomed, and I ask the Parliament to support the motion at decision time.
Thank you very much. And that concludes the debate on motion number S4M 06524 on the National Trust for Scotland Governance, etc. Bill. And it's now time to move on to the next item of business, which is consideration of motion number S4M 06723 in the name of Fergus Ewing on the Energy Bill UK legislation. And I now call on Fergus Ewing to move the motion. Minister.
Formally moved.
Thank you very much. And the question on this motion will be put at decision time, to which we now come. And there are 3 questions to be put as a result of today's business. And the first question is that motion S4M 06605 in the name of Keith Brown on the Forth Road Bridge Bill be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are. The motion is therefore agreed. The second question is that motion S4M 06524 in the name of Fiona MacLeod on the National Trust for Scotland Governance, etc. Bill be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. The motion is therefore agreed. The final question is that motion S4M 06723 in the name of Fergus Ewing on the Energy Bill UK legislation be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. The motion is therefore agreed. And that concludes decision time. Thank you.